The story begins with the sky being very dark and gloomy, but suddenly a bright white light appeared in the form of lightning. These lightnings illuminated everything around, and they came from a man who appeared in the sky. The guy was high, and hovered in the air with his eyes closed, completely enveloped in bright light. Some voices were heard in his head. The man kept calling his master. The guy began to cough and breathe heavily. Streams of sweat ran down his face. He could not understand who it was and suddenly opened his eyes. The guy held his hands in front of him and looked somewhere into the distance. He exclaimed that everything was bad. The evil spirit attacks them again. His gaze was filled with fear and horror. The eyes sparkled with misunderstanding and wariness. Some evil shadows began to approach the guy and attack him. They enveloped him completely and the guy began to fall. He spread his arms out to the sides and flew down. The dark force in the form of a sharp spear flew towards the bright, fiery light. The guy opened his eyes, not understanding what was happening to him. He was completely sweating from fear. He had this dream again. An evil spirit that has not calmed down. He couldn't understand what was going on. Because of these dreams, he wakes up sweating every morning and rarely gets enough sleep. When the boy looked at his watch, he was very excited and upset. The clock showed 9 in the morning. He began to get dressed very quickly and exclaimed that this was all he needed. He's not going to be late this time. The boy's name was Lu Li. He was the most ordinary teacher at school. Today was supposed to be his performance, his bonus, and his next salary, but he was late again. The police held a bullhorn in their hand and asked the suspect to be careful. He is completely surrounded by police, and they ask him not to harm the hostages. The officer continued to shout into the bullhorn for the man to immediately put down his weapon and surrender. But the suspect asked not to waste his time and provide him with a car so that he could leave here safely. The man held a knife near the neck of a pregnant girl. He threatened to kill her because of one wrong move. The girl held her stomach and screamed that she was in great pain. One of the military men, Special Forces Captain Chen Ting-yan, said that the hostage was too scared and would soon go into labor. The captain asked if his sniper was in position. He was waiting for an answer from his subordinates. The sniper began to report that the target was covered by a hostage and the shot was impossible. Chen Ting-yan was asked why he had not yet neutralized the criminal. The man replied to his commander that the situation had become more complicated and he was trying to solve it. Sir Li asked him to stop making excuses and immediately capture the criminal and release the hostage. Meanwhile, the teacher was already running to school. He said that he had 5 more minutes. The boy ran as fast as he could. There was no way he could afford to be late today, but he heard something out of the corner of his ear and paused. He saw many people near the building. Lu Li ran faster and faster. He couldn't understand why people were still robbing banks in their time. The boy thought that such a practice remained only in films. Meanwhile, the suspect did not let the girl go and asked where his car was. He threatened that if they did not want her dead, they should immediately let him leave. The officer told the man that his car was on the way. He asked not to touch the hostage at his own request. But the suspect exclaimed that they would not do anything to him until they saw a threat. He asked not to blame him in this case. The man raised his weapon as high as possible above the girl's head and said that he would finish her off first. The old man asked what to do. The woman replied that it was a matter of life and death, and that she just needed to give him the car. She exclaimed that saving the pregnant woman was most important. Lu Li thought that it was very cruel to use a pregnant woman as a hostage. The boy decided that he needed to somehow help this girl and took the stone in his hands. He found himself not far from what was happening and closed his eyes in concentration. He began to transform and many lightning flashed before his eyes. Lu Li was already near the building and approached to help the girl. He held the stone in his hands and then swung it and threw it towards the building. A powerful explosion occurred, and rays of bright yellow light shone around with a very burning bright light. The suspect held his victim by the head and raised his other hand with a bladed weapon above her head. A shot was fired and the volley flew towards this bad man and hit him. Again, there was a powerful explosion and many bright yellow rays illuminated everything around. This explosion was so strong that it blinded everyone on the street and even the police. The man who held the pregnant woman hostage let go of one hand. This blow that the boy made tore off one of his arms and he grabbed it with his other hand. The police could not understand what had happened. The captain asked if this was the work of their sniper. The guys exclaimed that this was a great opportunity and gave the command to move forward quickly. The capture group immediately flew into the building and the guys subdued this bad man. They asked him not to move and began to ring him. The girl wailed that her stomach hurt and the policeman asked her to quickly go to the ambulance. The captain began to radio to Sir Lee that the hostage had been successfully freed. The people who watched everything that happened shouted, thanking the Lord for the fact that the girl was saved. The man shouted that the sniper was simply incredible. The boy in turn lowered his head down, thought about something of his own, and wanted to leave the scene. And here in front of us is the Kixian Training Center. The boy apologized to the director and said that he got into trouble on the way out of here. The director immediately asked Mr. Lee not to worry, because he was fired after all. The boy did not expect such an answer and asked how he was fired. The man exclaimed that this was a training center, not a church. He didn't teach a single student for the semester and for what they should pay him. Lu Li replied to the director that all the students appreciated him. Last year, he was the best teacher according to the student. Then the director replied that it was last month and they are talking about the present. Without proper work, it is worth nothing. He showed the contract order and asked if he saw that he was fired. Lu Li replied that the director meant that if he started teaching students, he would not be fired. The director replied that he understood him correctly. He decided to see how he could get students out of thin air. The boy thought that it seemed he had no choice but to start contacting these dummies. Meanwhile, someone was watching from the side and told the leader that the target had been detected. The events took place in the country of Yin. The leader of the Shadow Alliance, Ye Qing, said that this was just great. The guy asked the head if they should go so far, and yet this is the prince of the country of Yin. But the girl replied that no matter what the Shadow Alliance undertakes, this always happens. In the guest room, the man told President Zhang that their Wen family had been known for a century. The price of 20 million is too low and they cannot accept this offer. The richest woman in Jiangnan province was named Jian Lu. She was looking through the documents. The girl said that in business, like in war, this offer and price is an honor for their group and family, and this is their only way to survive. The best doctor, Huan Yu, was sitting in the office. The girl said, turning to the director, that Mr. Inspector Xiang from the city of Shiju asks her to heal his mother. He is waiting for her outside with payment for her work. The girl replied that if she dared to distract her from reading again, she would drive her out of Tianyi Pavilion. Suddenly the phone rang. It vibrated on the table, indicating that it was necessary to respond. The servant who entered the office told President Jiang that he was receiving a call. The girl was sitting at the table with her arms crossed over her chest. Everyone was on alert and immediately grabbed their phones, peering at them to see who was calling. The girls began to press the phone. They wanted to answer the call and immediately extended their fingers to the screen. The boy held the phone in his hands and tried to say something to these girls. One of them asked the teacher if he had a lesson. She asked if he had a lesson for her. The girl came into the office, and when she saw the master, she apologized for being late. Then the girl sitting at the table replied that the always busy person had finally appeared. She already thought that she would not come. The second girl who was sitting at the table said that some individuals believe that their business is much more important than a lesson from a teacher. The girl grabbed her hair with her hand and said that she was completely different from her younger sisters. Some kind of flash occurred, and it was as if a portrait of her sisters appeared right in front of her. Teacher Lu Li entered the office. He looked through his glasses at the girls who were sitting at the table. He was very upset and held his head and sighed heavily. The boy exclaimed that they were at it again. He asked to be careful and calm down. Lu Li asked the girls to take their seats. When they saw their teacher, they immediately replied that they agreed with him and would do so. Lu Li said that even though everything happened very quickly and he did not prepare the material, for such a talented teacher like him, it would not be a problem. The boy began to explain that today was the first day of classes and he asked to talk about necessary things. He wanted to talk specifically about the awareness of his own strength and the strength of the enemy and discuss their recent experiences. The boy looked at one of the girls and asked Jiang Lu to start first. The girl got up from the table and, agreeing with the teacher, began to explain. She said that thanks to the advanced business skills she was taught, her family grew from a state of semi-bankruptcy to high income. At the moment, their company ranks top in terms of GDP in Jiangnan province and even throughout the country. Lu Li asked her to wait and said that he only taught her how to calculate debts and how to manage a small business and how she could expand like that. He told her not to swing so high. Zhang Lu walked up to him and sighed heavily. He asked the girl if she remembered how she used to live under the bridge. Running a business is very similar to life. You need to do everything measuredly step by step. The girl answered the teacher that she realized her mistake. Then the boy continued to say that especially with small businesses like hers, she should be careful because stability is a decisive factor. Jiang Lu thought that in his eyes, their company, which is considered the best in the province, is an ordinary stall, and now she is so ashamed because she thought too limitedly. Lu Li called Hua Yu. The girl immediately stood up and told the master that since he had such high expectations, she would be modest. She recently perfected one of the areas in medicine, and now common diseases do not cause problems in treatment. Lu Li replied that he knew that she was very weak before and therefore taught her basic self-care so that she would get better. But this does not mean that she has the right to treat others, and this creates a risk to the health of others. She apologized and said that she realized her mistake. This means that in the eyes of the master, her skills in which she was so confident do not even reach the basic level. The girl suddenly stood up from the table and said the name of her teacher. She volunteered herself. The girl asked her if there was a way out now. She asked if it was her turn now. The teacher adjusted his glasses and answered the girl that it was indeed Ye Qing's turn now. Ye Qing said that the martial arts skill he taught her was completely perfected. She has reached the pinnacle of perfection. There are no rivals left in this world worthy of her except her teacher. She was very serious in her statement and glanced at the boy. Lu Li asked her to sit down. Then the girl asked the master why he didn't remind her that he taught only basic self-defense and that she shouldn't look for problems for herself. Then the boy looked into her eyes and asked if she would listen to him in this case. The girl laughed and replied that, of course not. She is too strong to avoid problems. The other girls behind her gasped, almost laughing. Then the teacher said that everything was in order because in their time it was not customary to fight without a reason, and they lived in a law-abiding society. He decided that he needed to control himself because he couldn't let her break this table. If she destroys something, he will have to pay for it. He asked Ye Qing to sit down at the desk so they could continue. The girl asked the master if he always says that they only know a few stupid techniques, then why doesn't he teach something really worthwhile? But this was, of course, a blow to the very point below the belt. Hua Yu said that Ye Qing is right, and why doesn't he teach them something advanced? After all, the master always evaluates their achievements as simple and ordinary. What results can actually be considered worthy? The boy stood in front of the girls, lost in thought. What is actually a worthy result? He imagined medicine, business, and martial arts. Are they really still new to these areas? Lu Li held his head and decided that it didn't look like that. The knowledge he conveyed seems simple, but it contains the fundamental foundations of all disciplines. In fact, this is the best result that can only be achieved in the mortal world for another dimension. A picture again appeared in front of him where the master was, and many multicolored lightning bolts and fragments flying in different directions. The fragments broke and mixed with blue bright lightning and streams of light. The boy suddenly fell to his knees and grabbed his head with his hand. The girls called for their teacher non-stop. They gathered around the master and asked if he was okay. They couldn't understand what happened to him and what was wrong. The boy answered his students that everything was fine and he just had a slight headache. He thought that his memories were starting to come back to him. Ye Qing asked the teacher if he had recovered from his recent amnesia. In front of us is the Xian Training Center. The teacher said that this could end the first lesson. He said to his students that before they left, he had an announcement. Each of them has their own area of activity, and it is difficult for them to share skills with others. The boy tried to explain that when he teaches one of them, the rest of the girls are bored. Therefore, he decided that from now on, each of them would receive individual lessons for 1 week. The girls were very surprised by this statement and thought about individual lessons. Then the teacher asked the girls if they had any questions for him. The students gathered and began to consult with each other. They consulted and decided to answer their teacher. Zhang Lu said that since the teacher had made a decision, they had finally decided that they did not mind. However, they have one condition. Ye Qing explained that in order to celebrate the resumption of their activities, he must agree to this. The boy asked what the condition was. The girls, looking at the teacher, said that they wanted to visit his house. The boy was very surprised and laughed. Then he replied that he agreed to this. He turned to the girls and said that he agreed only for once. And here in front of us is the Hutong area. Many houses are scattered around. They were very small and neat. There were no signs of trouble, and the day was very bright and sunny today. One of the guys told the other that he couldn't even keep track of one bird. Rather, he asked to find it because this bird is very important to him. If they couldn't find her, he promised the guys that they would be in big trouble. Girls' heels appeared on the street. Jiang Lu said that it had been a long time since they last visited the teacher's house. Hua Yu added that almost 2 years have passed. They had a nice conversation about it. Yiting said that it was the teacher's fault for being so heartless and breaking off relations with them immediately after graduation, and not even answering their messages. The teacher laughed and said that, as they say, a man and a woman should keep their distance once they have graduated from school. They walked along the alley talking to each other. The boy with groceries in his hands was in front of everyone. The guys were already approaching the house. The boy walked with the girls approaching the entrance. When the guys approached the house, a woman was sitting on a bench nearby and looking into the distance. Luli approached and told Grandma Wu that he had just gotten home from work and invited his students to dinner. The grandmother replied that these 3 girls from the photo were in his house and asked if she was saying so. The woman exclaimed that they were even more beautiful in person. Luli introduced Grandma Wu to the girls. He explained that she was the elder of their district and had a kind heart. She helped him with a lot of things. The girls smiled at their grandmother and waved their hand at Madame Wu. The boy asked his grandmother if the medicinal soup was ready for Xiaobai. The grandmother answered her grandson that his cat could now chase dogs, and why she still needed medicine. Lu Li explained that Xiaobai is a stray cat. Even though she appears alive, she still has underlying health conditions, so it is important to continue taking her medications. Grandma said that in any case, his cat caught a little red bird today. Suddenly, someone said that the bird she was talking about was round and plump. The man asked if she had red feathers and a yellow crest on her head. Grandma replied that it was so, and she was very cute. She asked the man how he knew. Then the man began to shout that he knew this because the bird belonged to him. The man turned to the teacher and asked the guy to quickly give him the bird, otherwise he would have problems. Lu Li asked to remain calm as he needed to go home and check something. He said that if he had it, then of course he would return it in the same form as it was. One of Brother Hu's boys came over and said something in his ear. He asked to look at the girls who were behind this guy. When the man looked at them, he was shocked and asked where such beauties came from. The teacher heard their conversation and could not understand what they wanted. Suddenly, one of the guys took him by the shoulder and asked him to stop. Then the boy died, turned to him and asked what was wrong. Hu asked the 3 girls to stay with the fox for at least a day and he would not accuse him of stealing. The man asked, "How about this?" Then the boy said that the guilt about the cat had not yet been proven, first of all. And secondly, these 2 issues are not related to each other, so there is no need to involve these 3. And the last thing he wanted to tell him was that he didn't like his tone. The guys who were next to their commander were very surprised by the courage of this guy. Hu laughed and exclaimed that this scoundrel said that he did not like his tone. Is he really trying to pretend to be educated in front of him? The man did not stop laughing and asked what he was going to do to him if he did not stop. Or maybe he just wants a fight. Lu Lai replied that he was a law-abiding citizen, so naturally he would not participate in a fight. However, he can review some key points for his students. The boy asked the man which of the 36 vital points, if influenced with the help of the eyes of a phoenix, relieves numbness and loss of sensitivity. One of the girls asked the boy what exactly this point was. Then the boy pointed his finger at the man's hand and he, holding it, could not understand what was wrong. He grabbed his hand and asked the boy what he had just done to his hand. Lu Li answered the man that what kind of acupuncture can cause confusion, rapid heartbeat, and dizziness if applied using the tiger knock technique. Hua Yu, looking at her teacher, exclaimed that this is the point of the heart. Then the boy approached his opponent and poked him in the direction of his heart. The man staggered and began to fall straight onto the cold, hard surface of the road. His lads began to scream and call for their commander. The guys asked what happened to him. One of them asked the boy what he had done with Brother Hu. Lu Li replied that it was nothing special, he just hit a few points. Then the guy got angry and asked if he really thought that the little ones would believe it. They teamed up and approached the boy and decided to kill him. But Lu Li replied that this was a group attack on a person with a threat to life. He wanted to explain to the guys that it would be considered self-defense if he began to resist. The boy grabbed the hand of one of the opponents with one hand and with a slight movement moved it to the side. He calmly tried to explain to the guy that excessive force was of no use here. After that, Lu Li threw his opponent over his shoulder and he fell face down with all his might. Another comrade clenched his fist and began to approach the boy to strike. But Lu Li very deftly dodged the blow and stepped aside. The guy almost fell from such surprise. Lu Li looked at his opponent and exclaimed seriously, looking into his eyes, that this technique had become obsolete a long time ago. He prepared to strike this impudent guy and put his palm forward. The boy lightly hit his opponent right in the stomach and he coughed. The second guy was behind Lu Li. He raised his hands to strike and said that he wanted to see how he would dodge it. The guy clenched his two hands and wanted to hit the boy on the head. Lu Li exclaimed that he had a good idea and his legs were too weak. The boy found his opponent's weak point and hit him right on the knee with his elbow. This blow was direct and the boy fell straight onto the asphalt on both knees. Lu Li asked the enemy why he yells every time he attacks. He explained to his opponent that this was very stupid. He began screaming that his leg hurt very badly. Lu Li heard something and thought about it. He asked this guy if he wanted to try again, but the one lying on the ground asked to be released. Then the boy approached him and asked him to promise that he would stop suffering from such things. The enemy immediately agreed and began to leave. Lu Li waved to the guys and asked them not to forget to report themselves to the police station. Zhang Lu told her teacher that he managed to give a lecture right during the fight. Ye Qing said that he used the enemy's strength against him, and his skills were as impressive as always. The boy took his chin with his hand and chuckled. He asked the students what they learned from this incident. The girls thought and looked towards their teacher. They began to think about what to answer him. Ye Qing exclaimed that they should not limit themselves to using acupuncture in battle. But the boy replied that no, and they shouldn't act recklessly just because they have a few skills. If they end up like them, then their heads will hit the wall. The girls understood him and the teacher asked them to go since it was time to prepare dinner. They wondered where Grandma Wu was now. But she went to ask her neighbor, Uncle Wong, for help. The girls began to enter the room one by one. Lu Li asked them to make themselves at home while he made dinner. And now dinner was already being prepared and the boy's cat, sitting on the table, began to meow. The girls came up to him and wanted to hug the cat. Each of them called him to her. They talked about bringing him treats. The girls were already sitting on the floor, only for the cat to come to them. But Xiaobai quickly ran away from them as far as possible. When the boy began to call his cat, he immediately ran to him. He climbed onto his shoulder and began to rub the boy's head. Of course, he wanted to go to his master, and not to these girls. Lu Li immediately hugged his cat and asked him why he was so clingy. The cat immediately climbed onto his shoulder and snuggled. The girls watched what was happening. Ye Qing only asked if she felt abandoned. The second replied that it seems the cat knows more than they do. They were wondering if it was a cat or a cat. Lu Li, in turn, stroked his cat. He told the cat that Grandma Wu said that he caught the bird and brought it home. Lu Li asked the cat to show it to him. Then the cat walked towards the door and everyone watched him. The boy wondered if they were telling the truth about this. The cat began to approach the door and look inside. The guys continued to watch. Xiaobai sat down and began to purr sweetly. He was somehow content and joyful. A bird was sitting next to the cat. She was alive and looked sweetly in his direction. Ye Qing said that this bird is very small and cute. She called her to pet her. But for some reason, the cat began to protect the bird and hiss at this girl, not allowing her to approach the bird. Jiang Lu noticed that the cat seemed to be protecting her, and they managed to become friends. Ye Qing replied that she did not recognize the species of this bird, and it looked so special. Suddenly, the boy called this cat to him and beckoned him with his hand. But the bird looked in his direction with some stress and began to rise up. She rose into the air and began to flap her wings. The bird was very happy and flew to the boy. She flew up to Lu Li and immediately sat on his arm. It was as if she knew the boy. Lu Li noticed that the red feathers and wings were curled up. He thought about it. Lu Li decided that this bird could be a phoenix. Jiang Lu told the teacher that she would believe more if he called himself the Ming Emperor than the phoenix. Shi Hua Yu said that in the books these birds are described as relatives of dragons, with a swallow-like beak and a red snake on the chest. They sing and dance naturally. But she wonders if he can fly if he's so plump. Lu Li replied that she described an adult, but theirs was still a baby. Ye Qing asked if it seemed to them that something was burning. Then the boy sharply turned his head to the side and looked at his pan. The bird took off sharply and flew towards the stove. The boy and girls immediately rushed to the fire. Meanwhile, some guy began to pour water, but the water hit the man right in the face. The man was shocked and asked who did it and why. The guy who was in front of him explained that it was him. It was his brother Dao. The man asked the guy if he had lost something. He said he had heard about it. The fat man fell to his knees in front of the man and asked him for forgiveness. Then the man asked if he had not warned him that he would die if something went wrong. He put his foot on the man's head. He just mocked him and wanted to punish him, and he began to cry and begged to give him another chance because he would certainly fix everything. The man did not remove his foot from his head, and the guy continued to beg for mercy. Then Dao asked if he had learned information about him. The man standing next to him answered the boss that they found out everything, and his name is Lu Li. He works as a teacher. The man exclaimed that they haven't been doing anything lately. They can't even cope with an ordinary teacher. He explained that he wanted to see this bird on his estate tomorrow. If he doesn't do this, then he will feed all his people to his huge dogs. The man in the tie said everything he wanted. He turned his back to the door and began to walk out. Then the boy with green hair asked Brother Hu what they should do. The man exclaimed that they were weaker than him and did not choose him in a direct fight, so he needed to come up with another way. He turned his head towards Hao and asked the guy if he was good at computers. The boy replied that it was so. Then the bald-headed man asked to listen to him and began to tell them his plan. Meanwhile, events are taking place in the Qixiang Training Center. Lu Li lectured in front of the girl. Suddenly, they heard some steps in the corridor. They were approaching the boy's office. The director rushed in and exclaimed that this was a real nightmare and there were police in the room. Lu Li was very surprised and turned his head towards the director and asked why. He asked the director why the police would come here. The director explained that they had come to arrest him. He asked what the boy said and said that they should not lose their reputation. Then the bald-headed guy told the policeman, pointing at Lu Li, that he was the one who stole their bird. The second guy confirmed that he stole their octopus. Jiang Lu crossed her arms over her chest and exclaimed that the thieves decided to claim that they had been robbed. The policeman said that regardless of the identity of the owner, property is protected by law. He told Master Lu that they claimed that he stole their item and even provided evidence. The guys again began to lament that this was the case and these three were at the same time with him. Where is it written that teachers cannot steal? They have evidence and are wondering if he has an alibi. Zhang Lu told her teacher that he should not go with them, but the boy answered the girl that they were all equal before the law. He explained that he had not committed any crimes and the police would confirm his innocence. Then the policeman thanked the boy for his cooperation and asked him to go with them. The girl went out onto the road and followed the car that took her teacher away. Zhang Lu immediately called Xiaoru. She asked to send her a driver and said that she was at the training center. Before us is the Presidential Office of Secretaries. The girl said that she needed all the contact information of the city hall and police chiefs. Liru was a secretary at Jian Company. She asked President Jian if she could provide more information about the incident. This will help them find more useful contacts for her. Jiang Lu explained that her teacher was falsely accused and detained by the police, and she did not care who she contacted. If they didn't let him go in 30 minutes, she would definitely fire them. The girl asked the driver to go to the station. Meanwhile, Secretary Li Ru had already raised everyone's ears and was trying to resolve the situation as quickly as possible. She reported the maximum alarm level and asked to suspend all ongoing work. She explained to the staff that they had 15 minutes to find the right person for the president. And then 20 minutes passed. At the police station, the bald head asked Hao if he was sure that everything would work. The guy asked Brother Hu not to worry. This police officer is just a little stubborn. Last time, his friend stole a phone and was caught by him. He was ready to pay 20 grand for freedom, but he was still imprisoned. The second guy added that the video was edited by a real pro and he will be sent to jail. Meanwhile, in the interrogation room, the policeman told Lu Li that this was the evidence provided by Lin Hu. This is a video that demonstrates how they catch a lost pet on the territory of the reserve. If they cannot provide any information, then charges will be brought against him on at least 3 counts: theft, poaching, and illegal entry into the reserve. The boy asked the policeman if he could take a look at the video first. Then the policeman turned the computer monitor towards him and asked him to watch carefully. He began to press the button so that the boy would look at the video. It all started with Lu Li holding a net in his hands and trying to catch a small bird. The policeman explained to the boy that they had done an examination and made sure that this was indeed a nature reserve. But the boy folded his hands on his chest and closing his eyes said, turning to his fellow police officers, that he did not do this. The policeman replied that every accused could say so and asked him to provide evidence. Lu Li told the officer that he was aware that he had not been to any nature reserve. The problem is actually in this video. The policeman said to Mr. Lu that they were holding this meeting after preliminary verification of the identity of the actor. He asks Lu Li not to deceive, but to admit his guilt in what he did. Suddenly, the deputy chief and secretary Gao entered the office. The policeman was very surprised by his appearance. Jiang Lu approached the boy and asked the teacher if he was okay. Lu Li asked the girl why she was here. The deputy chief and secretary looked at the policeman. He asked the officer if he was out of his mind and how he could arrest people so easily. When the policeman wanted to contradict, the deputy chief asked him to shut up because the evidence was not enough and Mr. Lu had to be released. He turned to the boy and asked him for forgiveness. The man explained that these are the costs of the profession and they apologize. Lu Li told the deputy chief that he thought the officer acted within his authority. The man then asked Mr. Lu if he meant that the policeman was right. The boy pointed to the monitor screen and said that the officer had enough information. Moreover, an investigation was carried out, on the basis of which he got here. Jiang Lu turned to her teacher and asked if he was guilty. Lu Li told the girl that of course he didn't do it. He looked at those around him and explained that there was only one conclusion and that this video was fake. The deputy chief exclaimed that this was true and the video was faked. The policeman wanted to say that the data department said differently, but the deputy chief became very angry and asked him to immediately shut up and not interfere in this matter. Lu Li explained that if the examination did not reveal any violations, they must be dealing with a skilled fraudster. Fortunately, he has the necessary knowledge in this area and asks if he can talk to an employee of the examination department. Jiang Lu said that she would immediately contact top-notch experts in this field from all over the country. The girl asked to give her 3 hours and everything would be ready. But the boy asked her not to do this and said that he could finish everything in 5 minutes. Lu Li asked everyone present to give him 5 minutes. The deputy chief was very surprised and asked how this was possible. Even the simplest examination takes about half an hour. The boy said that he actually remembered something. One wonderful thought struck him. He said that he would ask these comrades to be present at this. Perhaps in 5 minutes they will be interested in them. The guys became wary and thought that things were bad. The policeman saw those who were listening outside the door and asked who said that there were problems with the video he was watching. He pointed his finger at the boy and said that he used all the basic modern methods. No traces of gluing or frame substitution were found. Baldhead asked if he heard. Modern methods were used for testing. He asked on what basis he dares to say the opposite. Lu Li looked in their direction and told the man that he had determined it by eye. The policeman didn't know what to answer, but the guy started laughing. Hu asked if he could perform a professional eye examination and decided it was a great joke. Jiang Lu turned to the teacher, not understanding what he was doing now, but the boy said, looking at her, that everything was normal. He held his laptop open in front of him and explained that luckily he was able to find something right now. The boy asked them to come quickly to the computer and beckoned to the police with his hand. He showed in the video at what second he suddenly turned around. Then he pointed with his finger where he was already facing the camera. Then the bald head asked the boy what was wrong here. The policeman said that everything was quite normal. Then the boy asked if they had considered it. He suggested slowing down the video a little. Lu Li explained that this fragment showed the true face of their main character. The policeman was simply shocked by what he had just seen. All the guys saw the bald-headed man in the photo and said that it was definitely him. Hugh exclaimed that this was simply impossible. This cannot be, and this is some kind of fraud. The teacher replied to the man that he was the one who provided the video. He asked how he could even do anything with it in advance. The policeman was shocked and asked if this was true, but he checked everything clearly. Lu Li explained to the policeman that he relied too much on basic methods. The people who created this fake video knew about this and did everything so that there would be no problems with it. The boy asked the policeman to better not have books at all than to believe them unconditionally. He asked the boy to remember this simple truth. He thought that at that moment he thought he saw something, namely the spiritual radiance of a mentor. The policeman answered the teacher with a joyful smile that he would definitely remember this. Lu Li explained to those around him that this was a montage of their own video that captured the fact of poaching. EU was very indignant and asked not to talk nonsense. The boy called them real defenders of nature. I am not me, and the horse is not mine. Then the guys asked Brother Hu what they should do now that they had already been identified. The man simply clenched his teeth and grinned maliciously, closing his eyes for a moment. The guys could not understand what Brother Hu was going to do, and they expected some kind of protection from him. Hu fell to his knees and exclaimed that it was him. He recorded this video and he also caught the bird and he asked to be arrested. He thought to himself that he wouldn't get the bird and returning without it was not an option, so it was better to go to jail. The man turned in their direction and said that he had decided to set an example for them and sacrifice himself. The guys immediately took each other's hands and burst into tears. They called their brother a real man. When the bald-headed man was led behind bars, the officer, looking in their direction, straightened his headdress and exhaled with relief. Another boy approached Mr. Liu and wanted to ask him something. The policeman asked how he managed to guess this. The teacher replied that he had already spoken and he just saw. The policeman said that the human eye is capable of processing up to 30 frames per second, and in the video, all 60. Did he really use surgical interventions due to which his eyes are now different from the eyes of other people? Luli replied that this is surgical vision. Then the policeman was even more surprised and thought that it was impossible to see the fragment in the video with the naked eye. He's clearly not human. Jiang Lu thanked Secretary Gao for her help. The man replied to the girl that her company occupies a leading position in their province and it is an honor for them. The girl asked the deputy chief, now that the culprits had been found, whether they could go. The man answered, looking at the girl, that of course they can. He immediately thought about his employees and approached them. He told the two police officers that it was their mistake and asked them to immediately apologize to Teacher Liu. The officers bowed to the boy and once again asked for his forgiveness. The deputy chief said that he was very sorry, they were negligent and caused him inconvenience. Lu Li replied that everything was fine and he understood that it was unintentional. But Officer Ma really showed himself to be a responsible officer. The guys thanked Mr. Lu Li. They once again apologized and wished them a good trip. When the guys returned, they were met by a girl. She appeared completely unexpectedly and scared the others. They were with Hua Yu at the main entrance of the police station. Ye Qing suddenly flew up to the guys. The boy asked, looking at the girls, what they were doing here. He smiled sweetly at them. Hua Yu explained that they heard that they were detained and immediately went here. The boy approached Ye Qing and, patting her on the head, explained that everything had already been resolved and they were only worrying in vain. The girl said, turning to the boy, that if, as compensation, they had dinner together. Lu Li smiled at the girls and laughed, asking what he should do with them. Of course, he agreed to go to dinner. Meanwhile, the guy with long hair said that he heard that his people had failed again. But the man told the immortal teacher that they were not competent enough, and this time he would go personally. The man threw himself at the feet of the immortal teacher and asked him to give him another chance. The teacher gritted his teeth and laughed when the boy said about the chance. He explained that it was his mentor's birthday soon and he was inviting him to go without a gift. But the guy promised that this time everything would work out. The immortal teacher said that there would be no next time. He called his red jackal and asked him to eat him. A menacing, creepy beast began to approach the guy. He did not stop growling and approached faster and faster towards his victim. The immortal teacher decided to see who dared to steal his bird. Meanwhile, in front of us is the house of the teacher and protagonist Lu Li. Ye Qing began to stretch and say how full she was. Hua Yu answered the girl that all she does is eat all day long, so he might get fat soon. Ye Qing said that it was because the teacher was simply amazing at speaking. She also eats a lot. Was she right in just asking? Then the girl seemed to hear something and abruptly stood up from the table. Hua Yu was also wary. She asked the girl where she was going. Ye Qing replied that she would go for a short walk because it was good for her after eating. The girl headed towards the exit and went out into the street. It was dark outside and she paused. The girl asked the man to come out and explained that she knew he was there. Meanwhile, there was indeed an immortal teacher on the tree. He noticed that she was able to sense his aura and asked who she even was. The girl replied that such a stench of a murderous aura could be smelled 10 miles away. The immortal teacher noticed that the girl had a very sharp tongue. He said that he hoped she would please him a little more before she died. The guy wanted to attack the girl, but she dodged his blow in time. Ye Qing ran towards the house with lightning speed. She dodged as best she could. The girl realized that this man was using dangerous techniques and she couldn't remain on the defensive. She realized that she definitely needed to attack and began to approach her opponent. The immortal teacher was also wary and could not understand where she had disappeared so suddenly. The girl was on the other side and wanted to strike her opponent. She managed to hit the man right in the neck with her elbow, but he had some object on his neck. Ye Qing raised her leg up and kicked the man directly in the chest with her knee. The girl screamed that it was all over and clenched her fist to deliver another blow. But the immortal teacher immediately put up a block, crossing his two arms in front of him. He asked if she really thought it was all over and exclaimed that they had just begun. Ye Qing began to worry. She couldn't understand why this man was so strong. He clenched his hands and began to scream. This guy's eyes began to glow with a bright yellow light. He tried to use all his energy and power against this girl. She began to fly back and could not understand how this was even possible. It was as if he had bound her with his strength. Ye King thought that many less experienced people would have already suffered from such attacks. The immortal teacher exclaimed that she moved well, even much better than most. But she does not practice the path of immortality, so in his eyes, she is no more than a bug. The girl really began to worry and became interested in who he even was. This man very quickly began to fly up to her to strike, and she barely had time to dodge. The girl decided that she simply would not have time to dodge and placed a block in front of herself. She felt that he was able to produce such a powerful attack. It was hard for her to withstand this blow. Ye King couldn't understand what happened to her hands. He really seemed to have the girl in chains. The immortal teacher began to approach the girl with another attack, and many bright lightning bolts shone around. The girl stood on one knee and realized that this man had driven her into a dead end. He stood over the girl and said that now she had nowhere to retreat. She was seriously scared because he was coming closer and closer to her, and droplets of sweat were running down her face. The man approached her and, putting his hand forward, asked how long she would still run from him. His hand glowed with a bright, fiery light that poured out more and more. But suddenly, someone grabbed his hand. Lu Li stood behind him. He asked the man what he was going to do. The boy asked not to make noise in the middle of the night. Vandalism is also a crime. The immortal doctor grinned and asked who else he was. Ye King asked the teacher to quickly leave here. Then the man asked if he had stolen his phoenix. Lu Li asked not about the wild bird in the nature reserve, he says. The immortal teacher exclaimed that the boy was talking too much and approached him with a blow and tried to attack. The boy was very dexterous and grabbed his opponent's fist into his own hand. He was very surprised because without any effort he stopped his attack. Lu Li said that attacking others is also illegal. The man became even more nervous and asked him to calm down and get out of his way. Then the boy planted his fist and the enemy could not move. He was enveloped in a red, bright aura. His hands were in Lu Li's palms. He gritted his teeth and became completely covered in beads of sweat. The immortal teacher realized that this boy was so strong that he couldn't even move him. He asked to be released immediately. Lu Li then asked him to promise that he would be polite and not use force. Only then will he let him go. But the immortal teacher was seriously angry and asked if he thought he could set conditions for him. The guy decided to use the demonic invasion against his opponent and glowed with even more intense fiery lights. Lu Li became alert and his gaze completely changed. Blue lights seemed to sparkle all around. The boy grabbed his head with his hands and sighed heavily. The immortal teacher immediately laughed and said that now demonic energy was circulating in his body, and in 10 minutes he would die. Lu Li did not let go of his hands from his head and thought that it hurt him, obviously due to the action of demonic energy. And why do some strange images pop up in his mind? The boy could not understand where he was now and what kind of place this was. Who was even in front of him? It was as if he began to remember some events. Lu Li was among the huge rocks and stood on the ice thinking about what kind of place this was. Lu Li looked at his hands and thought that everything seemed very familiar to him. The boy seemed to be in some kind of dream, and moving his eyebrows to his nose was thinking about something. He tried to understand who this person was sitting right in front of him in the lotus position and with his eyes closed. He wanted to ask the guy who he was and why he looked so much like him. But this guy continued his question and answered that it was all because it was him. Lu Li couldn't understand what he meant and wondered if it was him. Then the guy sitting in the lotus position said that it would be more accurate to say that he represents his forgotten self. He said that his name was Lu Li and he once had a chance to talk with Hong Jun. He told the man that he had a beautiful beard. He also witnesses the long-distance expedition of Qi Yu. There was a giant sorcerer, namely the god of weapons and metallurgy. He gave Chang'e a miraculous pill. In front of him was the celestial moon fairy. He also defeated the evil dragon. The long-haired guy remembered everything that happened to him earlier. He explained to the boy that people call him the progenitor of all immortals. He was called the immortal Wuzi. The guy with long hair asked Lu Li if he remembered what he just told him. The boy grabbed his head with his hands and replied that he remembered. He asked how the foundations of his cultivation could have been destroyed so much that he became like this. Then the teacher raised 2 fingers up and pointed in front of him and asked him to look for himself. He sat in the lotus position, and at the same time, in the bright light, he was high in front of the boy. He explained that by overcoming the final test of heaven, he could ascend to the top of the immortal world. In front of him was the spiritual realm. Luli decided that something was wrong here and where the demonic energy came from. Why are the storm clouds of heavenly tribulation filled with demonic energy? Demon Lord Wu Tian said that whatever he was not, he had already desecrated the aura of the immortal realm. Even if he successfully passes the test, he will carry the demonic energy with him, and then the entire immortal kingdom will become the domain of demons. The guy with long hair asked if he thought there was nothing he could do about it. Then the Black Shadow asked to stop boasting. After all, now that they have already become one, what can he do? Is he willing to give up his identity as an immortal, losing to heavenly tribulation? The guy with long hair looked at him and asked in return, why not? But the dark demon could not understand whether he was serious about this and became seriously angry. Then the guy with long hair folded his hands in front of him and wished death to this demon. Everything around lit up with bright blue lightning and an incredible explosion occurred. The demon called the boy a scoundrel and began to slowly disappear, as if dissolving into the darkness. The darkness disappeared and a bright blue light appeared, just a few 100 million years of improvement. He will be able to do this in the next life and rushed down, spreading his arms to the sides. The boy asked the teacher if he now understood everything. Luli replied that he remembered. He opened his eyes and looked at the teacher and said that he was an immortal cultivator. The long-haired guy replied that now that he understood everything, it was time to go back. It seems his young follower is in trouble. Yexing approached her teacher and asked if everything was okay with him. But behind her, the immortal teacher laughed and said that she could call him as much as her heart desired. The demonic energy has already entered his brain and there is no cure for it. He asked the girl to just give him the phoenix and he would allow her to die, not the most painful death. Yexing was not as simple as he thought and was going to fight tooth and nail to protect her teacher and herself. The girl asked to give her an antidote immediately. The immortal teacher laughed and exclaimed that she had great fortitude. He asked if she said that she was not going to save him, would she decide to try to take the medicine by force? The girl did not know what to answer. She simply grimaced in a malicious grimace and was about to strike. She decided to use the assassin's secret techniques and use the shadow seam. The girl began to approach her opponent, delivering a powerful blow to his body. But she realized that he was seriously strong and her gaze changed. It was as if something was suppressing her and she couldn't cut it. Yexing hit the guy in the chest with her hand and said that her protective aura could not be penetrated by some kind of piece of iron. She tried to strike again, but the immortal teacher had already clenched his hand, which was glowing with bright fire, to repel the attack. He approached the girl's body with a powerful blow and hit her right in the solar plexus with his fist. The girl began to cough and flew back with powerful force, hitting her back very hard against the wall. The eyes of the immortal teacher sparkled with some kind of demonic, eerie color. The girl sat with her back against the wall on her knees and coughed incessantly bright drops of scarlet blood. Her friends ran to the rescue, not understanding what was going on here. Zhang Lu told the girl that they decided that she and the teacher had been gone for too long. Hua Yu said that if she feels pain inside, it is better not to talk. The immortal teacher thought that two more beauties with beautiful figures appeared in front of him. He glanced at the boy and thought that this kid had a good eye. The three of them sat near the wall and the immortal teacher addressed them. He said that they were so beautiful that his head was spinning. He asks them to simply agree to serve him faithfully and then he will take good care of them. Zhang Lu got angry and asked, "How dare he?" The girl exclaimed that this was beyond all bounds of decency and he was just asking for trouble. The man laughed and replied that he had long ago surpassed all everyday life, that for him there were some laws that pathetic people obey. And this is said by a little demon who has not even crossed over to the sphere of laying foundations yet. When he was laughing, he suddenly stopped and asked who said it. Ludoli wiped his lips with his hand and asked what was happening. How did he hit him once and immediately forgot about him? When the girls saw their teacher, they immediately asked if he was okay. Ludoli smiled and apologized for making them worry about him. The immortal teacher could not understand how this was even possible. Demonic energy entered his body, and how was he able to recover after that? The boy told him that given his low level of cultivation, the demonic energy had dissipated before reaching his brain. So he's completely fine. Ludoli explained to the teacher that narrow-mindedness is not something to be proud of. As far as he knows, there are 3 ways to kill an immortal. The boy began to take off his glasses from his eyes. He wanted to explain what would happen next. When Lu Li took off his glasses, he asked permission to share one of these methods with him. The boy found himself on some huge white luminous lotus. He stood very confidently and proudly on this flower. He began to walk with the gait of a jade lotus, and his feet seemed to be on the clouds and carried him further and further. The boy kept his hands in his pockets, and with his eyes closed, the flower lifted him up. He rose higher and higher, the distant singing of the jade cycle and the blessings of cold autumn accompanying him. The boy raised his hand up and said that he was catching free light in the clouds. He did not open his eyes and caught the ice sword in his hands. Lu Li was shrouded in a gentle light haze. He held the 14 continents ice sword in his hands. The immortal teacher could not understand what was happening and asked the boy who he was. Lu Li did not stop climbing the flowers, and someone's voice asked him to go forward without stopping. He put his hand forward and a string of bright transparent balls was spinning above his hand, as if they were some kind of spheres. The greatest power was directed against the immortal teacher and approached his head in the form of bright white rays. The boy could not understand what else it was and, seriously frightened, threw his piercing, frightened gaze upward. Before he had time to understand what had happened, he began to scream in pain and put his arms out to the sides. Lu Li explained to the boy that this song is true qi, an amateur who has only a superficial understanding of the heavenly path. When the boy dealt with the offender of the girls, they approached him and called the teacher. Hua Yu, with tears in her eyes, asked how their teacher felt. The boy turned his head in their direction and replied that everything was fine and he just remembered old tricks from a past life. Jiang Lu looked at her master and asked if his memory had returned to him. Lu Li answered the girls that he remembered everything, but this is not the best place for such conversations, so he asks them to return. Ye Qing asked the teacher what to do with his body. The boy asked not to worry about him because the demonic energy would consume him and his body would disappear. And so Lu Li took the weakened Ye Qing on his back and they headed towards the house. Jiang Lu approached her teacher and offered him some hot tea. Hua Yu, meanwhile, felt Ye Qing's pulse and said that it had stabilized, and fortunately, everything was fine. The girl replied that she had already said that there was nothing to worry about. She glanced at the teacher and asked if he wanted to explain to them what just happened. The teacher took the glass of tea in his hands and, grinning, asked what exactly they were talking about. The girls answered the boy that they wanted to know about his identity and who he was. And in general, that man talked about some kind of demonic energy and heavenly path and what it was. He coughed a little after taking a sip of hot tea and replied that they had too many questions and it would take a lot of time. Hua Yu said that maybe they could even learn a lesson for themselves. Jiang Lu said that everything is fine and they are very patient. Ye Qing supported them and asked the teacher to speak. Then Lu Li told the girls that he would tell them everything in chronological order. He started everything 10,000 years ago. Ye Qing immediately approached him and asked what he just said. About how many thousands of years ago? Hua Yu asked them to be calm. Nothing like that. They are talking about the teacher, so it is not at all difficult to understand and accept. Jiang Lu remarked that if he was talking about 10,000 years ago, then the teacher must have met Qin Shi Huang. The boy explained that there was a thing, but then he was very young. He saw how talented he was and offered to teach him cultivation, but was refused. When his power was not yet unconditional, he changed his mind and sent for him. But then his qi had already dissipated, and then his body also became unusable. The boy explained to the girls that after that they didn't see each other again. But Hua Yu asked him to wait. She approached the teacher and said that the legend of the immortality seeker Xu Fu is the legend of a master. Jiang Lu covered her mouth with her hands and asked the teacher if he was really immortal. When the boy closed his eyes and smiled, he answered the girls that they understood everything perfectly. The girls got together and began to talk about how their teacher was immortal and how dazzling he was. Lu Li replied that they were exaggerating greatly. Jiang Lu stood up and, coming closer to the teacher, asked why he had lost his memory. The boy closed his eyes and began to remember what happened to him then. He explained that in those years he had to survive the last thunderstorm disasters. Then the world of immortals was completely devastated, and the ancient demon lords sowed the seeds of discord. These seeds began to pollute the spiritual power of heaven and earth from the very source. The more advanced her cultivation sphere, the easier it was for the demonic force to enter the body, and even he was unlucky. For this reason, he destroyed his golden body and scattered the cultivation base. He did this during the thunderstorm, planning to return and destroy the demon who decided to take up residence there. Who could have known that the demon lord was afraid that he would reveal an ancient secret? He helped the lightning disaster destroy him at the last moment. Then he had no choice and had to fight him even in this state. He tried his best to hurt him, but at the same time he allowed more and more demonic energy to seep into his body. The boy explained to the girls that it was then that he entered the mortal world and lost his memory. He said that now he had told them everything. Lu opened his eyes and stared at the girls and asked why they suddenly fell silent. Jiang Lu replied that the teacher simply overloaded them with information. Ye Qing said that they needed a little time to accept this. Hua Yu told the teacher that since he was previously immortal, after his descent into the mortal world, the immortal world plunged into chaos. Ye Qing was very thoughtful and asked the teacher what he planned to do. Lu Lai replied to the girls that he would cultivate again in order to return back and fight the demon lord. Sooner or later, we need to eradicate evil and return the world to the immortal kingdom. The girls listened to their teacher very carefully, and Ye Qing unexpectedly turned to him. She asked if she could go with him. They also want to cultivate and fight the demon lord. Hua Yu supported the girl and said that he should not discount them. The boy looked at the girls and thought. He looked each of them in the eyes and replied that of course it could be done. But he needs time to create a training plan for each of them. The girl asked her teacher how much time he needed and whether it would interfere with his work. Lu Li replied that he needed 1 month. Jiang Lu was very surprised and asked if he was actually talking about a year. But the boy replied that this was not at all true. Ye Qing exclaimed that she knows and he needs 100 years. Lu Li asked the girls not to guess anymore and said that with his incredible speed of preparing materials, he would only need 1 evening. The boy looked at the time and told the girls that it was already quite late. He headed to the door and asked them to rest today, and tomorrow morning their training would unofficially begin. The girls agreed, and now morning has come. Jiang Lu began to yawn, covering her mouth with her hand. She asked the others if they wanted to sleep. Ye Qing replied that she usually gets up even earlier to practice martial arts, so everything is fine. Hua Yu also explained that she gets up early on weekdays to keep her body in good shape. Suddenly, their teacher appeared in front of them and exclaimed that they were on time. The boy handed his students their educational materials. They immediately began to look at them. Lu Li asked Ye Qing to continue working in her field so that she could become a practitioner through martial arts. With her talent, she would be able to surpass Guan Yu and Zhang Sanfeng. He is sure that she will succeed. Hua Yu's teacher said that she practices the art of healing, and therefore he gives her the records of Sun Si Miao and Buddhist medicine. In the future, if possible, they will go with her to search for Shenong's robe. Then the boy approached Jiang Lu and handed her some papers. The girl asked her teacher why she needed 2 teaching aids. The teacher explained that business was her path, and therefore he should recommend that she follow the path of wealth. But the upper limit of this is too obvious, so in the medium term, she will move to the path of divine calculation. It is he who has the heavenly power of calculation and is the path of the Lingbao itself. By building a foundation, uniting with the heavenly path, and governing the gods through the prism of impermanence, the 3 of them can become great. 1 girl will have the power of money, another martial arts, and a 3rd medicine. The students were very pleased and exclaimed while looking at their teacher that this was very cool. Lu Li told the girls that this would all happen later. Achieving enlightenment is possible after attaining spiritual energy. That is why the first thing they must do is train. The boy stood in front of his students explaining this to them. The girls listened carefully to the teacher and closed their eyes thinking about it. Lu Li began to explain that immediately after birth, a person's qi begins to gradually dissipate. If this process is not stopped, it will completely dry up, and then the person will not be able to feel spiritual energy. The goal of their training is to clear the spiritual consciousness and begin to perceive spiritual energy again. Ye Qing exclaimed, looking at the teacher, that she had a question. She asked what exactly was required of them. Lu Li asked the girl not to worry because he had already prepared a set of special exercises for them. The boy explained that now he would teach them everything, and so he began to show the exercises. The girls listened carefully and repeated everything he demanded of them to achieve their own goals. They stretched out and said that they couldn't do it anymore. They had no strength left at all. Jiang Lu asked her teacher if they could rest at least a little, but the boy approached the girl and replied that he would not allow them any breaks. Her physical fitness leaves much to be desired, and her body is more contaminated with worldly qi. That's why she needs training the most. Lu Li asked Ye Qing to help her. The girl told the teacher that he didn't have to worry and that she would take good care of her. Jiang Lu was seriously scared and asked the girl not to come so close to her. when Ye Qing began to knead her, and the girl exclaimed that she was in great pain. A little girl appeared behind the boy and asked her brother what these sisters were doing. Luli put his hand on the girl's head and, calling her baby, explained that the sisters were actively training. The boy looked towards the girls and added that they were doing this in order to become stronger. When the girls stopped, they exclaimed that there was a beautiful child in front of them and asked the teacher whose daughter it was. Luli told the girls that this was Aunt Wu's granddaughter and her name was Yao Yao. The girls immediately greeted this little beautiful girl. The little girl greeted her beautiful sisters. Luli asked the girls if they thought that he would not realize that they were using this opportunity for relaxation. Zhonglu replied that this is true and that a balance of work and rest must be maintained. Luli told the students that even their intense training in a dream could not be called intense training. The little girl told her brother that he shouldn't be so cruel to girls. Luli replied that he wouldn't do it anymore and asked how she would like to stay here and help his brother look after them. And now, a whole hour has passed. Ye Qing was full of energy. Luli exclaimed that this was great and they were done with the first training session. The teacher told the girls that now, while their spiritual consciousness is active, he will teach them to meditate so that they can feel the spiritual energy. Spiritual power fills the earth and heavens, but it can only be perceived with the help of spiritual consciousness. The five senses are sight, hearing, ars, smell, touch, and taste. They reduce the sensitivity of spiritual perception, so they should forget about these five senses and focus only on the sixth. The students immediately began to close their eyes and tried not to hear, not to see, not to ask questions, and not to think, and also not to realize, and this is the only way to feel the accumulation of true qi. The boy approached the girls and asked them if they felt anything. Ye Qing closed her eyes and immediately responded to her teacher that she felt something. Then the boy turned to the other students and asked them if they felt something. The girls, with their eyes closed, simultaneously answered their teacher that they felt the same. Then the teacher smiled and exclaimed that this was just great and asked them to open their eyes. The girls sat in the lotus position and opened their eyes and immediately looked at their teacher. Ye Qing said that she now understood what spiritual energy was. Hua Yu said that it is like a breeze, but the density and composition are different. Zhang Lu exclaimed that this energy seemed to fill the entire space. Suddenly it dawned on her in a complex way, and she exclaimed, thinking about something. She looked at Hua Yu and asked what kind of spot she had. It was somehow sticky to the touch. What could it be? And her girls also found the same spot. Luli explained to the students that this method helps remove all sorts of impurities from the body. These are foreign bodies and contaminants that have been removed. The teacher walked up to Ye Qing and said that she should have one too. But the girl began to worry and worry. She continued to worry and sharply asked the boy not to touch her. She pushed him with all her might, hitting him with her small but powerful fist. The teacher was very surprised and began to sweat. Zhang Lu asked Luli if he knew anything about personal privacy. The girls asked the teacher not to come close to them. The boy explained to his students that this is a normal phenomenon and he is their teacher, so they have nothing to fear. The students were already in the house and, closing the door, told the boy that he was forbidden to enter. Luli explained that he had observed this for hundreds of years and what was wrong with it. He looked into the distance and said that they were still on the right path, and that was very good. The next step is getting rid of demonic qi. Suddenly, a girl approached him and asked what demonic qi was. Luli was surprised that Yao Yao was still here. The grandmother noticed that it was already time for dinner and the girl still had not returned. And now 3 days have passed. Small, beautiful houses rose in front of us, and a large green tree grew in the middle between the houses. Luli was sitting in the lotus position right under this huge tree, and with his eyes closed, he was concentrating on something. The boy felt very powerful spiritual energy. Hua Yu watched him and was afraid that the teacher had drained the spiritual energy of all living things in the area. She watched him and thought that he was very handsome. The girl did not take her eyes off him. She thought about whether people could be as perfect as this boy and could not take her eyes off him. The girl came closer to him and decided to try to touch his head. The teacher felt that someone was approaching him and immediately opened his eyes. He asked the girl what happened and asked if she had any questions about cultivation. Hua Yu blushed a little and said that it was nothing. She suddenly began to wave her hands and grabbed her face. She tried to remain calm and act as if nothing had really happened. The girl was holding a small wooden chest in her hands and brought it to the teacher. She approached the boy and said that she had already collected all the necessary herbs that he spoke about. Luli smiled and replied that this was just great and they could start refining the pill. The boy opened this chest and Hua Yu asked him if this was really possible even with such herbs. Lu Li answered the girl that they had just started the practice and therefore there was not much spiritual energy in their body and even less demonic energy. Moreover, these are only auxiliary elements that will help make the fragrant lotus even more valuable. Hua Yu was surprised by this and said that she had only seen it in ancient medical books. Where could she find something so rare? They both turned at the girl's voice. She exclaimed that she had good news. Jiang Lu approached them and said that she had found information about the fragrant lotus. The girl began to run up to her teacher and asked him to immediately look at what she had brought. Jiang Lu explained to the boy that with this invitation it would be much easier for them to get him. The boy looked into her eyes with hope and asked her to first explain what she meant. Old man Bai from the city of Wu became seriously ill and sent an invitation to prominent doctors with a request to organize a consultation. The Bai family promises those who can find the cure one of the Bai family heirlooms. Hua Yu asked if there was a lotus among the family heirlooms. Jiang Lu replied that indeed there is. After all, they have a miracle doctor and can't they test their strength now? Hua Yu said that she was the one who heard about Old Man Bai's symptoms and that he had no obvious physical injuries, but he slept day and night. These symptoms are very rare. Even the renowned doctors his family contacted were unable to help. She is afraid that she is powerless here. Suddenly, the teacher put his hand on her shoulder. He asked the girl not to worry and said that even if she didn't succeed, the teacher had his own way. He asked his student at what time the consultation was scheduled. The girl looked him in the eyes and answered with a serious look that the consultation would be the day after tomorrow evening. Lu Li exclaimed so that they would not forget to tell Ye Qing. They go together to get the fragrant lotus. And now huge high-rise buildings rise in front of us. The night sky shone with bright twinkling stars. The car drove up to a certain place and a girl began to get out of it. Jiang Lu stepped on the ground and dressed in an elegant long dress got out of the car. The girl told her teacher that they were already there. They were approaching some building. The student explained to the boy that this is where those who want to help the Bai family gather. Lu Li saw the talent hall in front of him. He exclaimed that it sounded pretty good. Jiang Lu explained to him that the Bai family from Wu City had a long history and great savings. This can already be judged only by the proposed awards. Some guy with a cigarette was already watching them. It was the second young master from the Ye family from Jingchen Ye Lianshan. He recognized Jiang Lu. The guy couldn't understand who the man was next to her. Did she really bring the doctor here? The man replied that Ms. Jiang Lu's name was indeed on the list, as well as the note about the accompanying persons. Just the name of the invited doctor is Hua Yu from Jianan. The second young master immediately thought about it. Suddenly, he broke his cigarette and threw it straight to the ground. He began to crush the cigarette with his foot and asked who he was and how he dared to encroach on what belonged to him. The boy exclaimed that no one should be with her, except him, of course. Ye King said that this dress is terribly uncomfortable and you can't even fight in it. The girl replied that there was no need to fight here and asked to stop pulling the fabric. Jiang Lu thought that it was very unexpected to see Mr. Ye here. They glanced at the guy. Ye Lianshan asked the girl if the previous plan had failed, and now they decided to find the possibility of an alliance with the Bai family. Jiang Lu replied to the guy that it seemed to her that this had nothing to do with Mr. Ye. Lu Li asked the girl who he was. Jiang Lu explained that this was the second young master from the Ye family from Jingchen. It was his family that interfered with the expansion of the Jiang Corporation. He proposed marriage to her, which was absolutely pointless. The young master approached them and asked who the man next to Miss Jiang was. The boy extended his hand to Lu Li and explained that he was Ye Lianshan and asked what his name was. The boy immediately introduced himself as Lu Li and explained that he was a teacher. Then the gentleman was surprised about his answer. He started shouting at Lu Li's back and asking why he was even here. The guy said that he would now call the guards who would take him out of here, but Jiang Lu approached him. She asked how he dared to do this because he was a dear guest who came at her invitation. How dare he behave like this? Then the man asked if she really called him and if he was a dear guest. He pointed his finger at her and said that it was not surprising that she had refused him then. It turns out she already had another option on the side. Ye Qing asked if she could shut him up forever. Hua Yu told the girl that they shouldn't start a fight. She could barely contain it. The girl explained, looking at Mr. Yi, that the teacher should help cure Mr. Bai and take the lotus. The young master began to laugh and asked if they really believed that they were capable of this. Lu Li looked at him and said with a serious look that this was all true. He asked what was wrong with that. The young master explained that this is only possible if it is in their dreams. After all, it is the Yi family that will cure him. The boy turned his head towards Dr. Sun and immediately addressed the man. He explained that the doctor has been a practicing physician for 30 years and is a hereditary physician. Sun Simiao's 18th generation descendant is Sun Ding. The boy was very surprised and asked if he really was a hereditary physician. How does this man know about his family's secret writings? The doctor was very surprised and thought about it. His eyes sparkled with surprise and curiosity. The teacher began to approach him. The doctor smiled and told the boy that, of course, both. Lu Li understood him immediately. Hua Yu asked the teacher if he knew his family. Lu Li explained that Sun Simiao had once asked him for some advice. Meanwhile, there was a guy in the stands. There were many more people in the hall. The guy wanted to say something, but he coughed very hard and closed his eyes. He thanked everyone for responding to the invitation, for their initiative and desire to help his father, suffering from an unknown illness. It was the young master of the Bai family from Wu City, Baijian. He continued to say that, as everyone has already heard, his father is physically completely healthy, but he is in a coma. Lu Li kept this man's file in front of him. He thought that this is detailed information that does not spread out from the first day. The boy began to look at these documents and think about what to do with them. Young Master Bai Zhen said that we need to find a way to cure his father, for which the Bai family offers any of the family treasures to the successful one. The young master bowed to the guests and exclaimed that he had great hopes for them. Suddenly, Ye Qing grabbed her teacher's arm and asked her to look ahead. The boy exclaimed while listening to the girl that everything was correct and this was exactly what they needed. A most beautiful, fragrant lotus shone in front of them. He beckoned with his brightness and beauty. The young master continued to speak, saying that he would certainly reward the one who helped him. One of the men thought that, judging by the available medical records, this man was the healthiest of all the healthy ones. Another, looking at his case, thought that it was simply impossible to believe. Absolutely all the man's indicators are normal. Hua Yu also looked at the man's photos and said that he still hadn't woken up yet. Ye Qing leaned over to the girl and asked how she was doing. Did she manage to understand what exactly was going on? Hua Yu replied that the Bai family had mobilized so many people and this could only mean one thing, namely something serious. Medical records will not help in making a diagnosis. Further diagnostics are needed here. The young master asked the young guests if anyone had any thoughts on this matter. The guests immediately began to look at each other and think about what to answer the gentleman. One of them raised his hand and said that it was difficult to say anything based only on the notes. He asks him to organize the opportunity to conduct a diagnosis in order to understand as much as possible and do something about it. One girl approached Dr. Hua Yu and asked her not to worry because her question was currently under consideration. The girl immediately thanked her. After this, Director Zhang was called out by the young master. He thanked the girl for being able to invite the doctor of the Heavenly Healers Pavilion. Doctors are people with big hearts, so Dr. Hua couldn't stay away. Hua Yu asked Mr. Bai not to worry. She promised to make every effort to help his father. The boy thanked Mrs. Hua and explained that his father had been suffering from this disease for a long time, and they had hired the best doctors, but to no avail. He hopes that today she and the descendant of the Sun family will be able to find out what the matter is. The gentleman told Director Jiang that he also really hopes for her. He has other things to do and asks permission to take his leave. The girl agreed with him and asked the gentleman to take care of himself. Suddenly, a second young master entered the room. He approached them and asked if they really intended to carry out diagnostics. He grinned sarcastically and asked when this did not give any results, what would they do? Jiang Lu said that he shouldn't worry about it. It is better for them to focus on themselves and their problems. The young master asked to calm down and asked if there were not enough records about this unknown disease. The doctor said that even if the family of hereditary healers could not cure him, no one else could. Lu Li came up and said that even Sun Simiao himself did not dare to say such things when he was still alive. Obviously, as a descendant, some knowledge and skills were passed on to him, but his tone and confidence were obviously something he developed on his own. Then the doctor turned his head to the young man and asked what right he had to talk about his ancestors. Sun Simiao lived his entire life with the belief that all diseases can be cured. But even in his later years, he still worried that his skills were not enough to treat everyone in need. Who would have thought that his descendants would use his name in search of fame as a belief in their own competence? Then the doctor turned to the boy and, holding his hand in front of him, asked him to stop and be silent. The doctor said he spoke for himself, relying on his skills. He decided to see which of them would be the fool when they were unable to cure him, having previously made empty promises. Lu Li replied that even though he knew almost nothing about his skills, he could already tell that he was more competent. Mr. Bai approached the guys and asked them to wait. He smiled and told the gentleman to calm down. Dr. Xin is a descendant of the King of Medicine, and Dr. Hua is a descendant of the changing eminent pavilion, actively practicing in the field of medicine. He cannot help but rely on such experts and thinks that it is in a dispute that the truth can be born. Jiang Lu said that she did not want to waste time on empty chatter, and they would just show them what real art is. The young master replied that they were the ones who would cure Mr. Bai. The guy began to wipe the sweat from his face with a handkerchief. He asked his guests to follow him immediately and pointed towards the room. The guests immediately began to move towards the room that Mr. Bai showed them. The gentleman opened the door and looked inside. Lying on the bed was his father, who was in a coma. The guy turned to the gentleman doctors and explained that they could go inside, and he asked the rest to stay here. Hua Yu walked up to her teacher and told him that she would come over too. The boy supported her. The young master glanced at him and noticed that she also called Lu Li a teacher. He couldn't understand why he hadn't heard of this guy before. Meanwhile, the doctors were already feeling the patient's pulse. Dr. Lin sat on one side and Hua Yu on the other. They both tried to understand what was wrong with this man. The girl closed her eyes and continued to touch the man's hand. Dr. Lin felt the pulse and his hand glowed with purple tongues, and the girl behind the door also closed her eyes and felt these purple tongues. Zhang Lu asked the guys if they also smelled the sweet aroma. Ye Qing replied, looking at her how she felt. Lu Li closed his eyes and said to himself that he understood something from this. Hua Yu began to leave the office and approached her teacher. She was completely wet with sweat. The girl said, looking into Lu Li's eyes, that she could not find the reason. The pulse is smooth and stable, the ducts are clean. She did not detect any symptoms of a serious illness. The boy asked the girl not to worry. He explained that his illness was not physical. The young master laughed and asked the boy what they understood. Even their doctor from the heavenly pavilion could not understand what was the matter. Lu Li asked the descendant of the King of Medicine whether he had any guesses or not. Then the boy smiled and said that of course they not only found the reason, but they also already prescribed treatment. The boy explained that the doctor had already written everything on paper. He smiled sarcastically and said that the doctor wrote a whole list and gave it to Mr. Bai. He handed over the list and asked the gentleman to follow his recipe for preparing the medicine. The man guaranteed that in half a day Mr. Bai would wake up. He was confident in his words and smiled contentedly. Mr. Bai began to study the list on which was written Angelica Daurica, Groundsel Kepa, Sulfate of Magnesia, and Atractylotus lanceolata. Lu Li talked about white-flowered peony, shoria seeds, wives' hair as an auxiliary component. He stood behind Dr. Sun and asked if he was telling the truth. The doctor immediately turned his head in his direction and pointed his finger at him. He was very angry and asked how he knew his family's secret recipe. The boy replied that he only knows one thing, that the recipe for attracting souls is not the best solution in this situation. This is a brutal method that activates the flow of qi, thereby causing the patient to wake up. He asked the doctor how dare he suggest something like that. After a week, the effect will dissipate and the patient will suddenly die. Apparently, they only offer this because of their desire to receive a reward, regardless of the price for their treatment. If only he knew that Sun Simiao's descendants would behave like this man. He would never allow his family to expand. The boy began to use his power against the doctor. He turned into a huge dragon and began to approach the doctor. He began to back away and fell to the floor. The young master approached Dr. Sun and asked him if he was okay. The boy cast an angry glance at Lu Li, and beads of sweat began to flow down his cheek. He asks him to stop talking about this nonsense. The guy exclaimed that he had no idea what he was talking about. Lu Li asked Dr. Sun if he would also pretend and say that he didn't understand anything. Dr. Sun began to shout that he did not know what soul ritual he was talking about. He simply prescribed the patient treatment according to his symptoms. Then the boy began flapping his hands and looked at him with a contemptuous look. He couldn't stop clapping his hands and exclaimed that this was just a wonderful treatment. He asked the guy to tell them what Mr. Bai was sick with. What disease does his medicine treat? The doctor thought that he only needed to complete the soul attraction ritual and then Mr. Bai would wake up. He asked if the doctor was aware of the real effect of this remedy. Sun thought that as long as the Bai family trusted him, then he had nothing to fear. The man began to explain that this was the secret remedy of the golden box of 1,000 recipes from their family, specially formulated for an ancient disease called percolepsy. He asked what attraction of the soul the boy was talking about. After all, he had never heard of it. Lu Li said that when he demonstrated this recipe, he immediately realized that he was not familiar with the concept of medical ethics. He would never have thought that it was possible to be so heartless. Since this is his family's secret medicine, why not try it on himself? But when the man heard this, he immediately got scared and asked why this was happening. Lu Li replied that he would not do this precisely because he knew about the side effects. The boy exclaimed that this medicine would suck all life out of the body. The doctor listened attentively to Lu Li, and streams of sweat flowed down his cheeks. He was seriously scared. Mr. Bai also became wary and began to slowly doubt this doctor. He asked Dr. Sun if this guy was telling the truth and handed him a list of medications. The man replied that it was not at all like that. Lu Li then asked the man how he diagnosed narcolepsy. His ancestors used acupuncture and herbs. He came close to the doctor and looked into his eyes. The man was seriously scared and started talking about an ancient recipe. The doctor exclaimed that a lot of time had passed and he might have forgotten all the details of this prescription. But the boy approached him and asked how he could forget it. Most likely he just didn't have time to come up with it. And all because this disease does not exist. If not for him, he would have bought another life. Lu Li called this doctor a real swindler who encroached on a person's life. The guys were shocked by this statement, and Mr. Bai directly asked the boy what he was saying. Mr. Bai asked those around him if they already knew what illness his father was suffering from. Lu Li, lowering his head down, answered the master that this was not a disease at all. He explained to the son of a sick man that his father had a parasite. Haya Yu was very surprised by this statement and asked about what kind of parasite. The boy explained that his name was Da Tura. He imagined in front of him what he had just talked about. Lu Li said that the main and only symptom of the presence of this parasite is eternal sleep. If you strain your receptors a little, you can feel the sweetish aroma emanating from it. Mr. Bai was shocked by this statement and couldn't understand what this guy was talking about. He exclaimed that ever since his father fell into a coma, he was indeed constantly surrounded by a strange smell. He thought it was just his imagination. He asked the boy how to cure his father. Lu Li closed his eyes and thought about something. He answered the gentleman that of course he knew how to cure him. Bai was delighted and exclaimed that this was simply wonderful. He promised to immediately prepare everything necessary, but the boy answered the master that nothing was needed and his presence would be enough for this. Lu Li glanced at Hua Yu and asked the girl to come to him in order to go with him. The girl approached her teacher and, obeying him, began to approach the patient's room. The boy explained to the girl that first she needed to lift him up. She listened to her teacher again. Lu Li closed his eyes and was completely enveloped in bright blue rays of light. His huge bright dragon began to wriggle around him. The boy did not open his eyes. Hua Yu said that it turns out that spiritual energy can be used to cleanse the body of poison. The girl did not expect this and began to watch her teacher. She thought that it was not surprising that the teacher was trying to teach them how to use their spiritual power. A true master combines the practice of healing with the use of spiritual power in his work. The man began to cough without even opening his eyes. Scarlet drops of blood scattered around. The old man did not stop coughing more and more. Lu Li held him by one shoulder. Hua Yu was surprised by what she saw. Parasites lay before them. Mr. Bai flew into the room and asked his father if he had come to his senses. The boy approached his father and asked how he was feeling. The father looked at his son in surprise. He explained to Mr. Bai that he felt a little weak. He asked, looking into his son's eyes, what was happening to him. Lu Li explained that the parasites had already left the body and the natural processes of cleansing and regeneration would soon begin. He has been in a state of sleep for too long without any physical activity, and he will soon recover. The doctor, looking from the side, was very surprised at this guy's abilities. He was seriously scared and upset. Lu Li cast a contemptuous glance at him and asked why he was silent. The boy called him the great descendant of the king of medicine. He asked if he wanted to explain what connection narcolepsy has with parasite infection. The doctor was even more surprised and frightened. His face was covered with streams of sweat. The man fell to his knees, completely upset and discouraged. He wondered if this man really had parasites inside. Lu Li replied that doctors must put moral principles above all else. If he again has an irresistible desire to harm someone, he will not get off easily. He sat on his knees in front of him with his head down. It was as if all the vitality had been sucked out of him. A guy came up to him and asked Lu Li to stop immediately. He just embarrasses them in front of everyone. Suddenly, a man walked up to Lu Li and called him master. It was Mr. Bai's father whom he had just cured. The son brought him to the boy and he thanked him. Lu Li replied to the old man that he had been bedridden for quite a long time and should not overload himself with sudden movements. Bai thanked the boy and said that if it weren't for him, his father would have been in mortal danger. Lu Li explained that although the parasites had left him, his body was still weak. Therefore, he asks him not to neglect good nutrition, moderate exercise, and rest. The old man called the boy a kind man. Thanks again for your help and concern. Mr. Bai said that no one could even think that parasites would be to blame. Only thanks to their extensive knowledge, they managed to find out. Lu Li explained that such practices originated in the south of the country and have always been tantric. The boy asked if there were any connections with people from those parts. The old man thought and replied that he had never been to Xinjiang and did not know anyone from there. Bai told Mr. Lu Li that he knew several other people with similar symptoms. Perhaps if they can collect more information, they will be able to find out something. The boy was very surprised and thought about whether there were other patients. While he was thinking, a student approached him and called him. The girl asked the boy to allow her to deal with this issue. Lu Li smiled and replied that this was a great idea. All the acquaintances of the Bai family are people with high status, so it is better for her to do this. Mr. Bai asked Mr. Lu which treasure he would like to choose as a reward. Then the boy did not have time to ask him when he raised his hand up and exclaimed that he needed a fragrant lotus. Of course, Mr. Bai agreed to give him this gift. And now it was night outside. Lu Li walked towards the exit and got into the car. He waved to Mr. Bai and his father. When he got into the car, Hua Yu approached him. She was a little upset that she could not cure this man. Then the boy turned to her and said that he would teach her how to treat such cases. Then she will be able to cure other patients with the same symptoms. The girl exclaimed, turning to the teacher, that she would not let him down and would try very hard. Jiang Lu asked her teacher if he wanted to use their help to find the culprit for infecting these people. The boy replied that he wanted to, and it seems that the culprit doesn't care at all about his victims, especially since they are all innocent people. Lu Li thought for a moment and, looking forward carefully, said that this man should not be allowed to continue to do evil. The students listened to their teacher very carefully and agreed with his ideas. Yiqing thought that the teacher was so honest and fair. Hua Yu considered him a true gentleman. Zhang Lu thought it was very touching. Hua Yu turned to the teacher again and asked if he had taken the path of cultivation and whether they should get rid of them. Namely, from these worldly laws of correspondence between experiences and what was done in a previous life. Lu Li asked her where such a strange set of words came from. The girl replied that it was because it was written that way in the book. One who has embarked on the path of cultivating immortality must go to the mountains or forests, abandoning worldly laws and habitual feelings. Before she had time to finish this, the boy slapped her on the forehead as hard as he could. He asked why he should even teach such stupid students like her. Lu Li asked if something similar was written in scientific literature or fiction. Hua Yu asked if there was any difference in this. Then the boy began to explain to her that the so-called improvement they call is the heavenly path. That is, follow your heart and submit to circumstances, and a winding road can be leveled with force. Lu Li asked Zhang Lu if the alchemical golden tripod was ready. The girl told the teacher that she was ready. The boy said that then tomorrow they would start making the elixir of immortality. They will not put off the difficult mission of laying the foundation indefinitely. The students immediately turned in his direction and joyfully exclaimed that this was good news. Yiqing asked the teacher if they could really do this. Zhang Lu brought the golden exercise machine and explained that it has a 1,000-year history. According to legend, the latter practitioner of Qingchen Mountain used it to make pills and elixirs. Lu Li looked at this tripod and said that everything is fine and this is really him. It was even better preserved than he expected. The boy asked why he was placed here. Jiang Lu replied that she bought a small plot of land not far from their house. Therefore, even for him, it will be convenient to use it as needed. Lu Li thought to himself that he could smell wasted money. Hua Yu exclaimed that this tripod was so big and asked how to use it. How much wood will it take to heat it? Lu Li replied that one cannot take an earthly approach to the things of immortals. He asked not to worry, but just observe. The boy began to approach the golden tripod from the other side and call on the power of heaven and earth. He asked to be endowed with the essence of the sun to work with the 5 basic elements. Luli found himself in a blue circle and, standing in the middle, decided to start quickly. The golden tripod began to glow with different bright rays of fiery color. The students began to approach the teacher and asked him what kind of formation this was. Luli thought about it and raised his hand up and explained that these are 9 revolutions of the element of fire. She is able to compensate for the power of the sun and generate golden fire. The boy raised 2 fingers up, explaining all this. Then, he pointed to the cauldron with these fingers and said that this was the birth of the golden sun. As soon as the fire subsides a little, then you can start. They gathered around the cauldron and began to watch. The students brought a variety of herbs to the cauldron. Hua Yu asked whether to just give it up and that's it or not. Luli said that of course not. Maintaining the fire also requires spiritual power, but they don't have to worry about that. The boy asked the students to go and get ready for work. Once everything is ready, they can start laying the foundation. Then he will explain to them how to cultivate. The world of immortals is divided into 9 spheres, which are called the 9 stages of divergence. He began to list all the areas he had just talked about, starting from the sphere of hardening, laying the foundation and focusing life, and continuing with spheres of dark connections, endless suffering and the abode of the soul, and ending with the spheres of soul return, deification, and heaven. Today he will tell them about the first 3. The first sphere of hardening is their current foundation, the awakening of spiritual consciousness and cleansing of the body. The opportunity to absorb spiritual energy are open to them. The second area is laying the foundation. Upon reaching this sphere, the spiritual energy in their body will concentrate in a vortex and automatically begin to attract the free force of heaven and earth. They will be able to use some magical practices. Next, you have to break through to the next sphere called the concentration of life. The body will have to develop additional gland ducts that will be responsible for the circulation of spiritual energy. Once this is achieved, the differences in performance on the various immortal techniques will become obvious. Luli asked the girls if everything was clear to them. Hua Yu raised her hand and asked if it was due to using a different set of techniques. Luli replied that everything is correct and the structure of additional meridians is determined by the techniques that compact them. Their meridians will vary in structure, shape, and functionality depending on the techniques chosen. If the results are not satisfactory, then you will have to choose a different technique because this is extremely important. But they don't have to worry about it because he will take care of it all. And then half an hour passed. The disciples sat in the lotus position in the middle of the courtyard, meditating. The boy stood opposite them and said that it seemed like they had already managed to even out their breathing. The teacher approached the golden cauldron and exclaimed that, fortunately, everything was ready here too. He waved his hand towards the tripod, and a bright golden light began to pour out of it, illuminating everything around. Many dark spheres began to rise upward from this cauldron and glow with yellow rays. The boy took these spheres into his hand and brought them closer to his students. They began to look at his palm with curiosity. Yating came closer and counted these spheres. There were 5 of them. Luli explained that they were for Aunt Wu and her granddaughter. For ordinary people, these pills will help strengthen the body and promote development. The teacher explained that once they were ready, they could take the spheres. He asked them not to worry and said that he would look after them. The entire yard was illuminated with bright white rays, and it was like stars rising into the air. Luli held one of the spheres in his palm. Bright yellow rays emanated from it, illuminating everything around. Zhang also brought her sphere to her mouth and immediately swallowed it, closing her eyes. The girl kissed very powerful streams of spiritual energy and realized that she just couldn't hold back. Luli asked not to try to control all spiritual energy, but to try to control only the volume that seems possible. You need to concentrate and direct it. Until the flow is formed and begins to move on its own, you must not stop. It is necessary to monitor your breathing, and when their flows stabilize, then the foundation will be laid. The water in the golden cauldron began to spin in the form of bright golden hoops. The disciples looked carefully into this cauldron, after which they gathered in the courtyard and began to meditate. Golden bright lightning began to circle around the girls and rise upward. The teacher watched what was happening. He watched to make sure nothing supernatural happened. The girls immediately glanced at the teacher and began to call him. Luli immediately understood what they wanted to say. He congratulated them and said that they had succeeded. The girls were very happy and told their master that they had done it. Lu Li replied that he knew this and had seen everything himself. Ye Qing was already running towards him with hugs. Jiang Lu found herself in some kind of dark luminous haze and asked what else it was. Ye Qing also had some kind of dark ominous cherry-colored haze on her hand. Hua Yu had exactly the same one on her leg and she couldn't figure out what it was. Lu Li explained to his students that this is demonic energy. The demonic energy that those pills removed from their body. The boy thought that there was more of this energy than he expected. Has new demonic energy entered the spiritual arteries? Hua Yu began to worry and approached her teacher and asked what it was. The boy replied that it was nothing to worry about. He was just thinking about something a little. He invited the girls to go take the pill to Yao Yao. And now they were approaching the little girl, who at that time was sitting on her knees in the yard. The girl was busy with her own affairs when she heard someone calling her name. Then the students greeted the child in unison and Lu Li leaned towards her. He called the girl to come to her brother. Then the girl realized that these were her brother and beautiful sisters. Lu Li asked the girl why she was playing all alone and why she was outside. Where is her grandmother? Yao Yao replied that grandma was home. She bought her a lot of things and asked her to behave. Then she said that her brother would take care of her. The girls noticed that this sounded very strange. Hua Yu exclaimed that she had a bad feeling. The boy asked the girl how long ago her grandmother had gone home. Yao Yao began to rub her eyes and replied that she didn't remember. But after that, she managed to finish her ice cream and many cookies. Zhang Lu said that taking into account the possible speed of chewing food, it is about 20 minutes. The boy called the girls to come inside quickly. Ye Qing asked the girl where her auntie lived. Yao Yao explained that she was in the easternmost room. Hua Yu found this room but noticed that the door to it was closed. Ye Qing immediately ran to the door and asked everyone else to quickly move aside. She broke this door with one powerful blow and the girls looked inside. When the guys entered the room, a grandmother was hanging in front of them with a rope around her neck. Lu Li immediately put his 2 fingers forward and commanded his strength to cut these ropes. The grandmother began to fall down, and the boy was already running as fast as he could towards her. He caught the grandmother and asked if she was okay. The woman opened her eyes and she was perplexed. She asked why he saved her and said that it would be better to just let her die. Grandmother began to ask everyone for forgiveness. The girl approached her and asked if she was in pain. The grandmother's gaze was filled with despair and pain. Tears sparkled in her eyes. She hugged the girl and asked her to forgive her, and the woman asked Yao Yao, hugging her, how they would live with her now. The boy asked his aunt what happened. Hua Yu also asked her grandmother to tell her about it. The woman said that she had worked tirelessly for half her life, saving money also from Zhenhua and Ahui. She explained to the boy that all this money was taken by scammers. Lu Li was seriously angry. Ye Qing told her teacher that Zhenhua and Ahui are who she is talking about. Lu Li replied that this was her son and daughter-in-law and their daughter. 2 years ago, the couple died in a car accident. After that, it was Aunt Wu who raised this girl. Jiang Lu told her aunt that they would definitely help her get everything back, but she needed to tell them everything in detail. The grandmother, with tears in her eyes, began to tell me that this happened in the morning. She was washing clothes when suddenly her phone rang. She answered the phone and was told that it was an organization that supported families in need. According to them, her granddaughter Yao Yao has problems obtaining educational licenses. She will not be able to be registered in primary school. The man asked not to worry and said that he just wanted to help. He also submitted an application for financial assistance. The money should have arrived by now and he asked her to check the account. The grandmother looked at the phone and said that financial assistance from the organization to support needy families had been accrued. The man told the grandmother that he accidentally made a mistake with the amount. If his boss fires him for this, who will decide the issue of Yao Yao's enrollment in school? The grandmother immediately became upset and asked how she could return this money to him. The guy explained that everything is very simple. She must tell her the password for her bank card. He will transfer the funds back before his manager notices. Grandma said that she didn't need money at all as long as Yao Yao went to school. Zhang Lu was very excited and asked her grandmother if she then told them the password. The aunt replied that she reported and all the money disappeared from her account. She is so guilty because this is the money for which Zhenhua paid with her life. Hua Yu asked her grandmother if she had contacted the police and replied that yes, but they said that this number no longer exists. They also said that these are ordinary telephone scammers and now this is a fairly common occurrence. Zhang Lu approached her teacher and asked him how much money they stole. Lu Li answered the girl that the cash benefit for the death of breadwinners, personal savings, and a pension are all about 1 million. Jiang Lu explained to the teacher that she could transfer her twice as much. They could simply say that the criminals were punished. But the boy replied that it wasn't worth it because the problem wasn't about money, so they will deceive Aunt Wu again. This is of no use here, and we need to find these criminals. If intentions do not correspond to the idea of good, then achieving perfection will be extremely difficult. Zhang Lu looked at her teacher and told him that she understood what he was talking about. Taking something away from an elderly person who is unable to defend himself is the last thing a good person would do. The boy was very angry and told the girl that they must definitely pay for this. Zhang Lu said to her teacher that the relevant departments are unlikely to be able to help with this. Lu Li looked into her eyes and asked if any money leaves marks on itself. Accounts, cards, money laundering channels. No matter how well they hide, in any case, you won't be able to keep track of all this. The girls listened attentively to their teacher, looking at his hand, with which he showed all this. Zhang Lu called Xiao Zhou and asked her to instruct the reporting bank to check accounts with large flows of funds in the past 6 months. Ye Qing called Liu He and asked for information about the largest illegal card dealers in Jianan. Lu Li watched the actions of his students. He gave them a clue that any actions leave their traces. You just need to reach them. And here in front of us is the door that the students and the boy entered. Hua Yu asked the teacher what happened. Lu Li replied that in a couple of days, he and Ye Qing would go in search of those who deceived Aunt Wu. Hua Yu would deal with patients infected with parasites. And Zhang Luyong said that Aunt Wu and Yao asked to send someone who could take care of them. Hua Yu reassured her teacher and said that they would do everything. Jiang Lu asked the master to go, and they will take care of everything here. The boy immediately thanked his students. Ye Qing said, turning to the other girls, that it seemed to her that the teacher was seriously angry this time. The girls supported her in this. Lu Li explained that this is all because they are in a similar situation to Auntie. After all, he is also an old man. The girls immediately remembered how the boy talked about several tens of thousands of years ago. The students laughed together. One of them told the teacher that she had just received the report. The traces of all unofficial SIM card sellers in Jianan province come from here. You need to go there and find out everything. Lu Li told Ye Qing that she would go with him to find that merchant. Zhang Lu should continue to monitor the information, and if anything, they are in touch at any time. The time has come for these arrogant little people to pay for their atrocities and feel his wrath on their own skin. It was a light and bright night outside. Lu Li approached the building and asked Ye Qing if it was here. The girl took out a piece of paper and began to read Ji Nian Ping, 44 years old, nicknamed the Black Dragon, business monopolist in the distribution of illegal SIM cards, as well as theft of personal data. Lu Li Yu suggested finding this comrade and talking to him, and so they headed towards the entrance to the building. Meanwhile, a man was sitting at the table, and bodyguards stood around him behind him. The man began to eat. He was just about to start eating when someone knocked on the door. The man paused and asked his bodyguards to open the door. The guy immediately obeyed him and went to the entrance. The boy began to open the door, but he did not have time to do it completely. Someone pushed him back with all his might, and the boy flew far, far away like a bird in flight. The rest of the guys could not understand what was happening and were very surprised by what was happening. Lu Li appeared on the threshold, and next to him stood his student Ye Qing. She was already flexing her fists. The man's bodyguards asked how they dared to break in like that. The man asked them to be calm. He asked why two young people decided to visit at such a late hour and what happened. The boy began to explain that they had come to ask Mr. G about a certain client. Lu Li approached the man and said that he hoped Mr. G would not refuse them courtesy. The man replied that he could not help but upset them. Firstly, the rules of their industry require maintaining the confidentiality of information. He began to get nervous and asked, secondly, who he was and why he dared to break into his house so brazenly. Lu Li looked into his deceitful eyes and asked if these were all the questions he wanted to ask him. Mr. G replied that that was it and pointing his finger at them, asked to seize them immediately. The bodyguards immediately obeyed their commander and began to run up to the boy and girl. One of them approached Ye Qing, called her baby, and said that she would have to try his blow on herself. The girl asked the man not to disgrace himself. She clenched her fist and began to fly towards him with a powerful blow. Ye Qing struck him straight in the jaw with lightning speed and streams of blood splashed around. After that, she struck the boy again and his teeth flew in different directions. She simply tore it into pieces and asked who tried whose blow on themselves. After that, the girl very quickly approached Mr. G. It ended up right on his desk. Ye King grabbed the fork that was lying next to him and began to approach the man very quickly. In an instant, the girl with the fork found herself near the neck of this unscrupulous man. The fork touched Mr. G's neck. A few drops of blood began to come out of his throat. Luli sat down on the chair opposite the man and asked if he was sure that this was all. Then the man spread his arms to the sides and replied that of course not, of course. He asked the guys to ask anything. He promised to tell everything he knew. Luli said, looking into the man's eyes, that he needed one name and one address. He is his client. The first major transaction was about 6 months ago. His services are in demand, and from time to time he returns for another portion of SIM cards. The boy asked the man if he had any ideas. Mr. Chu began to frantically remember this. The man exclaimed that he remembered. There is one person who fits the description. He called himself Wen Ji. The delivery address was Yushu Street, 176. The boy leaned over, getting up from the table, and thanked him for his assistance. The guys began to approach the exit, and Luli told Mr. G that they would not bother them anymore. The man rose from his chair and tried to catch his breath. Luli turned to him again and asked if he understood that he was doing illegal things. He has until dawn to appear at the doorstep of the relevant authorities. Otherwise, they will come back and find him. The man was silent, but Ye Qing suddenly turned to him and, putting her hand forward, asked him to answer. A sharp dagger flew past his shoulder and stuck into the wall. Mr. G promised to do what they just talked about. Before us is Jiangji Private Hospital. It was still night outside and many lanterns and light bulbs were shining in the hospital building. Jiang Lu was sitting on the sofa. She held her work computer open on her lap. Suddenly, the girl became happy about something. Hua Yu came into the office and asked why she was so joyful. Jiang Lu explained that it was a GPS system that she had set up for the four of them. These 2 green dots mean that the teacher and his companion are fine and everything went well. Hua Yu replied that she understood everything, and the method given to her for extracting parasites was quite difficult to master. Perhaps this is another test from the teacher to make her stronger. The girl told Hua Yu while digging through her computer that she found something else. All the infected, including Mr. Bai, are heads of large companies. If we consider all the partners with whom the companies have dealt recently, we can single out one corporation. When the leaders of large companies fell into a coma and their shares collapsed, that company, on the contrary, continued to flourish. Hua Yu asked if she wanted to say that perhaps the head of this company is to blame for everything. The girl glanced at her and explained that this was the most plausible version so far. Hua Yu said that in this case they should start an investigation against this company. Jiang Lu replied that this was not necessary at all. Her last patient was Cao Hua, the CEO of this company. Even before he got sick, they entered into some kind of agreement with him to keep this information secret and arrange a demonstration performance. As soon as he is cured, she arranges for him to attend business events, thereby putting the suspect into a stupor. Hua Yu said that without entering the tiger's den, you cannot catch the cubs. Make this company believe that the situation has fundamentally changed, then force them to reveal themselves. Jiang Lu replied that everything was correct. She doesn't know how soon the teacher will return, but she can't wait to tell her about this plan. And here in front of us is the famous Yushu Street, namely house number 176. The guy who deceived the grandmother exclaimed that today was another beautiful day and wished everyone a good job. He asked his comrades not to lose heart. This is truly a wonderful job that pays well. He leaned over to one of the employees and said that these old people were idle all day, and therefore they did not need this money. So they will take it and spend it for their own benefit. Lu Li and Ye Qing came to the reception desk of this building and told the girl that they were looking for Boss Wen. The girl asked to tell me if they had an appointment. Lu Li replied that no, and this is because in this case, there is no need. When the guys began to walk forward, the girl began to get nervous and ask what they were talking about. She exclaimed that strangers couldn't just walk in there and started calling security. She called security at the reception and explained that they had intruders. Before she had time to call the guards, they already appeared right in front of them and asked the guys to stop. One of them asked, how dare they, and whether they were tired of living. He gave the command to the others to throw them out of here. One of the guards told the girl that this is a private facility and you can't just get in here. But if she agrees to play a little, maybe they'll come up with something. Before he had time to finish this, the girl took them both by the heads and looked into their eyes with a stern, serious look. Before they could finish speaking, she slammed the two guys' heads against each other. After that, she threw them on the floor in front of her and they fell unconscious. The head guard pointed a gun at them and asked them not to move. He threatened not to look at the fact that she was a girl. The bodyguard asked them to stop immediately. When Ye Qing approached him, he said that one more step and he would shoot. Before the boy had time to pull the trigger, the girl hit him with one deft movement of her foot. The guard began to fly to the side and the girl exclaimed that he was talking too much. She grabbed the pistol, which was already flying to the floor, and grabbed it right out of the air. She did it very skillfully and deftly. It was just professional. The boy said that it seems that illegal possession of weapons can also be added to the crime. Lu Li went to the reception and asked which floor to look for Boss Wen on. Then the girl immediately replied that she was on the third. The boss was just asking his employees to carefully check every message and listen to recordings of phone calls. We need to put pressure on these old people where they hurt and take their money. Lu Li, hearing the voices, said that it seemed they had come to exactly the right address. When the boy began to open the door, the boss asked who they were. Lu Li asked him not to worry and explained that he would only need a couple of minutes. He approached the boss's employees and asked them to stop these criminal acts. The boss asked what nonsense he was talking about and who they even were. He started calling security and asking them to go up to the third floor. He gave the command to remove these two intruders from the office, but the security began to shout that the door was closed. Ye Ting told her teacher that she would take care of the security, and the guy agreed with her. The girl opened the door and began to approach the first guard. She began to deal with them. The guys from the office were shocked. The boss heard cries for mercy. Lu Li said that since he still did not fulfill his request, then he apologizes. He raised his two fingers up and made a loud click with them. Bright, fiery flashes in the form of purple lightning scattered around. The employees began to wail and scream in pain. Their boss was already lying on the floor. One of the employees asked the boy to ask who started this whole mess. He explained that they are simple workers who carry out orders. Then the boy replied that they would insist that they carried out the order, even taking into account the way in which they received their income. The man listened to the boy and exclaimed, looking at him, that they were also victims. He deceived and forced them to do this work. He also threatened that if they did not obey, he would tear them apart. All the employees shouted that they too had been deceived. The boss asked the employees if he had treated them badly. Lu Li said that it turns out that he also forced people to work. There really are too many accusations against him. The boy approached the boss and said that it seemed he was behind all this. Lu Li approached him and exclaimed that this was all very impressive. The boss turned to the door and began to call his guards louder and louder. Well, the guards didn't answer him. Lu Li approached the boy and said that it seemed that he still did not understand what situation he was in. The boy raised his hand up and began to use his abilities. Meanwhile, the girl was already dealing with the guards and killed almost all of them. One of them flew into the door, breaking it. In front of us is a club, namely a VIP room. Two girls were near Brother Hu. They called him a very cool man. One of the girls asked the man not to be distracted by this phone and came as close to him as possible. But he grabbed her head and answered the call. The man asked who was calling him, and the girl screamed that she was in pain. Lu Li introduced himself and said that he was a teacher, and also a law-abiding citizen who solves crimes. One of the guys in Jiang Lu's office engaged him to start tracking the location. The guy looked at the monitor and explained to the girl that he would need about 40 seconds. Hu asked who it was. He decided to sit on his ears and asked where he got his number. Then the boy explained that Mr. Wenju gave him his number. The man asked if he was tired of living and asked who allowed him. Lu Li replied that he was afraid he would not be able to answer these questions, since he had just been taken away by a police car. The guy said that the location had been successfully determined. This is Dai'an Province, Zhuili City. Lu Li explained to the man that he simply decided to call him to warn him that he was next, and he promised to see him in Zhuili. The man got very angry and asked if he thought he could catch him. He promised to find him and finish him first. When he hung up, he threw the phone on the floor and exclaimed that this guy was the first to dare to hang up. He kept screaming and remembered that these girls were still here. He jumped up from the sofa and clenched his fists and asked where his pheasant was. One of the guys opened the door and exclaimed that he was here. For some reason, the guy laughed. He went into the room and asked his boss if he had called him. Hu gave the command to take people with him and check every hotel. If someone named Lu Li passes registration, then he must be immediately informed about it. The guy nicknamed Pheasant stood quietly in front of his boss and began to obey his command. He headed towards the door with lightning speed as he was afraid of his boss. He, in turn, clenched his fists. He asked the boy if he wanted to play on his land, and he exclaimed that he should just try because his days were already numbered. Meanwhile, the plane was landing. The conductor informed the distinguished passengers that their plane had arrived in Shuili. Many people were already standing on the site. There were girls and men there. Yeting asked her boss where they would start and where they would look for information about who. The boy answered the girl that there was no need for this, and they would simply check into any hotel. If that man is not completely stupid, then he will find them and come to them himself. At this time, the girl looked at the documents and asked if his name was Lu Li. Streams of sweat ran down her face and her gaze changed. The boy answered the woman that it was so and that it was him. The woman explained that it so happened that all the single rooms were occupied. They will contact the boss immediately to resolve the issue. The woman talked to her boss for a long time while the guys were waiting for her answer. Ye King explained to Lu Li that she was passing on information to someone. But how do they even know about him? The boy answered the girl that during their phone call, he himself told him his name. Ye Qing was surprised. They threw bait. The woman at the reception asked to wait a little, and their boss would arrange the suite for the two of them. Lu Li decided that everything went well and the fish bit. He smiled with satisfaction. Ye Xing heard something out of the corner of her ear and sharpened her gaze, throwing it to the side. The boy asked the girl what happened. Ye Qing replied that there were cars coming here. After thinking a little, she explained that there are at least 4 of them, and they are quite heavy. The girl said that these cars were moving in their direction. Lu Li replied that this was very good. He headed towards the door and asked the girl to go with him to meet their boss. The cars were already approaching, and one of them stopped right in front of the entrance. There were several other cars behind her. Pheasant asked his boss if he would go himself, or if he should also go with him. The man replied to the boy that anyone could kill this idiot Wenjiu. He asked to send people to check if he was really worth something. Many guys with bats got out of the car, and the boss gave him the command to break this Lu Li's legs, for which they will receive 20,000 on their face. Lu Li and Ye Qing were already standing outside, going down the steps to meet the boss. The guys began to listen to their boss and run out of the car. They, with bats in their hands, rushed forward to the boy and the girl. Lu Li looked at them with an X-ray gaze, releasing his incredible abilities. He turned into a huge, powerful dragon of a bright blue color that opened his mouth to attack his opponents. The dragon soared into the air and began to rise higher and higher as it was huge. He was already flying towards his opponents in order to quickly attack them and prevent them from killing his master. The guys could not understand what happened to them. It was as if they could not move. The rest were lying on the ground. One of the guys exclaimed that this is magic, this is just fucking magic. The second one touched him by the shoulder and asked him to step aside. He grabbed his weapon. The boy held a huge, sharp cleaver in his hands and began to run up to his opponent. He exclaimed as he approached Lu Li that no matter what it was, he didn't care and wasn't afraid. Before he could raise his bladed weapon over the boy's head, he stopped the sharp blade of the cleaver with one finger. He called this guy ignorant and fearless and said that this was great stupidity. The guy answered, looking into his eyes and gritting his teeth so that he would let go of his weapon if he didn't want to die. But then the boy let go of his 2 fingers and all his energy was directed at the enemy. The guy began to fly far, far away as a volley of bright blue color flew towards him. It was a long, bright beam that sent the enemy into a long flight. He fell backwards onto the car from which all these guys were getting out. He began to scream in pain. The boy looked at the rest of the guys and asked the next ones to come out. They could not understand what kind of power this was and whether he was even human. The guys put out their pistols as they got out of the car and gave the command to shoot at this guy. Lu Li gave them a disdainful look and prepared for another attack. With his incredible strength, he chained the hands of this worthless one, and they could not do anything. Ye King was also shocked and couldn't understand why the pistols exploded. She didn't expect to feel such powerful spiritual energy. This level is very high, and she doesn't even know how strong it really is. The boss asked his guys to leave quickly. He gave the command to leave this place quickly. The car immediately moved forward at full speed, flying away from these strongest guys. But the girl moved towards the car and asked them to stop immediately. The boss gave the command to step on the gas faster. The guy asked Lu Li not to kill him. He promised to tell him everything without fail. A girl approached the teacher and asked if they should let him go. Then the boy replied that why not and directed all his strength against him. He explained to the girl that such energy emanates from these people. It looks like an ominous one, and it's quite interesting. He asked the girl to simply let this energy show them the way. Meanwhile, the boss was sitting in the car, and this incredible dark power was emanating from his hand. He was holding something in his hand, and this object was completely shrouded in a dark haze. He turned to the driver and asked him to quickly go to their mentor. The guy pressed the gas even harder, and the car flew as fast as it could. The boss exclaimed that only he and his mentor could resist this scoundrel. And here in front of us is a beautiful large building that glowed with red and yellow light. In the middle of the room, there was a guy sitting on the floor in the lotus position with his eyes closed. The guy was meditating and suddenly heard his name. The boss asked his mentor for help. He flew up to the boy and with tears in his eyes asked to save him immediately. Then the guy considered it great impudence. He asked how he dared to interrupt the practice of his mentor. The man threw himself on his knees in front of his mentor and exclaimed that he understood that he deserved death for such insolence. But this time he encountered a great practitioner, and he is simply incredibly strong. He handled firearms as if he were dealing with toys. He began to ask his mentor and beg, in the name of his annual gifts, to help him. The mentor asked the guy where he was from and how it happened that they became enemies. The man began to explain that he called himself a teacher, but did not mention the sect. Then the mentor, lowering his gaze to the floor, answered the guy that he would deal with him. The new name of the Xuanyin Alliance should be treated with leniency. Luli asked, the man, what if he was not going to be lenient? The guys did not expect this man to appear so unexpectedly and so quickly in this building. Luli told the man that following him was not such a bad decision after all. How fun it is to sit in a shack within the villa and engage in self-deception. The mentor was very surprised and, gritting his teeth, cast his gaze in front of him. The man pointed his finger at the boy to his mentor and explained that it was him. Then the mentor asked if they decided to make enemies in the person of Bai Lunan and the Xuanyin Alliance. The boy thought about what kind of alliances this guy was talking about and stared in front of him. Ye Qing thought that she had definitely seen this name in the records of one organization. Massacre in northern Myanmar, where 2 villages burned and hundreds of soldiers died. There was not a single survivor there, and it was all his doing. Lulili smiled and told the guy that he had never heard this name before. The mentor got very angry, clenched his teeth, and threw a contemptuous look at him. He concentrated all his strength and energy in his hands in the form of a purple bright ball. He called the boy ignorant and exclaimed that he was going to die. An incredible evil force began to emanate from his hands and completely enveloped the guy. Heads rose in the air around him. Luli was surprised to see flying heads in front of him. They began to fly up to him faster and faster, and the boy put a block in front of him. Only once living souls transformed into flying heads can be so furious and unbridled. Luli asked his mentor how he dared to behead living people for his own ugly purposes. Violation of laws, both human and divine. The mentor asked what was wrong with that. Today, his head will join his collection. It was an eerie sight, and the heads seemed to be holding bright snow-white spheres in their mouths. The mentor gave the command to these heads to break the boy's defense. Luli exclaimed that this was very presumptuous. The heads began to rise higher and higher, and the boy's strength slowly managed to overcome them. The mentor was shocked and could not understand how this was possible. Streams of sweat ran down his face. Then the guy brought his hands closer to each other, and a bright purple circle appeared above them. Various insects and parasites began to emerge from this circle. Luli, seeing the parasites in front of him, realized that these insects were products of evil witchcraft. The parasites began to crawl, soaring in the air and revealing their evil, sharp tentacles. The boy exclaimed that these insects are violent and poisonous by nature. He asked the girl how they would deal with this, electricity or fire. Luli began to transform the power by putting his 2 fingers up and said that they would stop at the second. A bright red fire began to rise up, attacking these evil, poisonous insects. The fire enveloped these parasites, burning their bodies. The flame rose higher and higher, and they burned in it. The mentor was very surprised and looked angry at his killed pets. The mentor was very angry and, gritting his teeth, lowered his head down and closed his eyes. Streams of blood sprayed from his mouth. The guy exclaimed that he forced him to do it. The mentor approached his face with his fingers and began to draw something on it. He smeared an evil smile on himself with blood from his mouth and smeared his face with this blood. After which, the guy covered his hand and fingers with lines of his scarlet blood. The guy decided to use the divine formation, and horns grew from his forehead. The mentor began to turn into some kind of evil demon, and sharp, huge fangs came out of his mouth. Ye Qing could not understand where such a deity came from. Luli replied that it was something like a deity tooth or a cultivator. He gave up control of his body to gain various magical powers. The boy exclaimed that this was all useless. He stuck 2 fingers up and began to exploit the vulnerability. A stream of blue energy approached the face of this mentor, and streams of blood gushed from his mouth. An incredible force flew towards the guy and knocked him over, hitting his back against the wall. Luli said that regarding those flying heads, he used special techniques to control them. If this connection was broken, a head appeared in front of him, one of those that this mentor had. Then many more heads appeared, and the boy explained to the girl that these heads would certainly want to take revenge on him. They began to approach the mentor and grabbed his body. The guy began to scream in pain and horror. The boy asked him to pay for his actions by watching what was happening. Suddenly, he heard something out of the corner of his ear and became a little wary. He approached the boss and began to tell him what concerned him. He looked him straight in the eyes. But before the boy could finish speaking, the boss exclaimed that he admitted his guilt and asked for mercy. Ludali knelt down in front of him and put his hand on his shoulder and said that this was very good. He smiled at him and asked the guy to surrender voluntarily to the authorities. Fraud, human trafficking, murder, illegal possession of weapons. He asked the guy not to forget to mention all his crimes, and he obeyed him. The boss said that he was absorbed and his cultivation base was destroyed. As soon as the energy finally dissipates and they do not calm down, Luli exclaimed that he had at least 100 lives on his conscience to use living people for such vile purposes. Now that the spiritual currents have been destroyed, such a life will be worse than death for him. This is also a kind of retribution. When the mentor coughed a little, the girl asked if he had not died yet. She glanced at his hand. He was holding some kind of talisman in his hand without letting go. The guy dying said about the alliance. He said that now Luli has become the enemy of the entire alliance, and they already know about everything. Now he faces an unenviable death. The guy stood in front of this half-dead corpse and listened to what he said at the end. Meanwhile, television was broadcasting about the assistance of citizens with an active social position. The Zhuli police arrested a gang of fraudsters operating in the telecommunications sector. A group of fraudsters was arrested. Luli asked the girl what it was like to be a citizen with an active social position. Luli replied that if we take into account her past assignments, then she would call the complexity of this mission a game of playing mother's daughter. But helping good people and delivering justice feels pretty cool. Luli said that in order to become a cultivator, it is important to develop both body and spirit. And a good mood helps a lot with this. Ye Qing looked out the window and thought about something. She held the pen in her mouth, looking carefully at the boy's hand. The girl noticed the Xuanyan alliance sign. He held this sign in his hands. Luli explained to Ye Qing that it was a kind of ritual vessel that functioned as a means of communication. The boy explained that no matter how far away they were, it was worth ringing and the same one would ring in another place. Luli said that Bai Lunan used his last spiritual powers to convey information to the other members of the alliance. Ye Qing remembered his words before his death that other members of the alliance would come to avenge him. And he took this token with him. The boy explained that since this thing works at a distance, they will still come. The girl wanted to ask the teacher why he was so cruel to them. They are also cultivators. The boy looked the girl in the eyes and replied that they were studying the evil arts. These people only slow down the development of their world and greatly harm everyone else. Then the girl asked what development of the world he was talking about now and what he meant. Luli began to explain that, unlike the lifeless world of cultivators, the human world is much more interesting. Especially in the last few years, there have been significant changes. In times of prosperity, there was always peace overhead, clean seas and rivers. Therefore, if someone intends to undermine this peace and cause trouble, pursuing their own selfish goals, even if it is your friend, he must be punished. Ye Qing thought that everything was the same as in the human world. Maybe that's why the teacher doesn't want to ascend. Yama suddenly appeared. She ran to the phone and said hello to her brother. Luli looked at his aunt and asked her if the money was returned to her. Grandma immediately replied that they had returned it, and her fellow police officers explained everything to her. In the future, she will definitely report to them first. The boy was very happy and asked his grandmother how things were going with the elementary school. Grandma replied that Sister Zhang had already taken care of everything and asked her not to worry. Yao Yao also said that the girl said everything was okay. The boy exclaimed that this was just super, and he was now on a business trip abroad. As soon as he returns to the country, he will immediately visit them. The grandmother asked the boy to be careful, and the girl also said goodbye to him. Suddenly, Jiang Lu approached the boy. She was very excited and exclaimed that she had heard the news. The girl asked if everything was okay. The boy replied that everything was fine and asked the student not to worry so much. Zhang showed where the operating room was located and asked the guys to quickly go there. The girl explained that this was one of the latest cases, namely the CEO of that same company. Li asked from that telephone conversation whether it was possible to guess that the ideological inspirer of all this was a competitor company. Zhang replied that it was. Dealing with competitors using similar methods is the easiest way to do business. These people crave quick success and immediate profit, while not caring about the well-being of others, and this is clear as day. To find out who is behind all this, he agreed to play along with them. As a thank you, the Jian Corporation will enter into an exclusive contract with this company for 3 years. Yiqing asked if she could explain all this in simple words. The girl exclaimed that her brain was about to explode. Zhang turned to her and asked if she was aware of this situation with Director Cao's coma. Ye Qing replied that she knew this and inquired further. Zhang began to explain that now, absolutely everyone knows that the director of this company is sick. But in a few days, he will appear at the agreement signing ceremony. Because of this, the attackers will try to strike again, and she is sure of it. And Mr. Cao and his company are under constant surveillance, so it will be quite easy to catch the killer during the next attempt. Yiqing hugged the girl and exclaimed that she did a great job. Zhang replied that she even bought the first 5 spots in the hot news. It's trivial and expensive, but the killer will definitely get hooked. The boy also told the girl that she did a great job. Now they control the situation and soon the attacker will be caught. The boy looked somewhere to the side with an excited look. He began to examine the patient, after which he glanced at his student Hua Yu and said that they would leave the matter to her. The girl was standing right above the patient and holding her hands, trying to begin his treatment. A bright green glow emanated from her hands and bubbles rose up. The girl asked to prepare a bag for her and to hold his back as tightly as possible. Li also looked at the patient and said that judging by the patient's condition, Hua Yu's treatment plan is quite good. Suddenly, the boy woke up and began to cough. He spewed many parasites from his mouth. The girl was pleased and exclaimed that this was very good because all the parasites came out along with the products of their vital activity. This was a success in her life, and she achieved that she cured the patient. Meanwhile, the rest of the students rejoiced at her success and clapped their hands. Li also said that the girl did a great job. Li told the patient that he had just recovered, so there was no need to bother him so soon. But time is pressing and there is something they would like to discuss as soon as possible. The patient exclaimed that he, Mrs. Zhang, and Dr. Hua saved his life and he would tell everything he knew. Li asked Mr. Cao if he had heard of Chengxin Pharmaceuticals. The boy replied that of course he heard. Since last year, they have been actively expanding and occupying a niche in the market. Not long ago, he met with the head of the company. The first thing he tried to force on him was to take care of the pharmaceutical industry. The guy said that he was very sorry and he gave him a chance. It was he himself who made this decision. Cao got angry and asked if that scoundrel Zhang Wanming could be behind all this. Li answered the boy that today all suspicions point specifically to him. Zhang said to Director Cao that he must continue to follow the recommendations because very soon he will return to normal. Everything will be known in a couple of days at the contract signing ceremony. Cao asked Director Zhang not to worry. He promised to do everything in his power. Yiqing opened the door in order to move away from the master and the rest of the students. She told her teacher that she still needed to confirm with Mr. Cao his treatment plan and that she would catch up with them later. Li approached Hua Yu and stroked her head with his hand and said that she did a great job this time and asked her to continue in the same spirit. The girl immediately agreed and, blushing a little, went forward to fulfill the boy's request. Zhang looked at Li carefully. She glanced at him with interest. The boy could not understand what was the matter and also wondered. The girl crossed her arms over her chest and looked ahead. She took a few steps forward and then the boy asked if she had decided not to wait for him. He came as close to her as possible and asked the girl if she was angry with him. Zhang turned away and, blushing, said, closing her eyes, that it was nothing like that. Li still thought that something was wrong here and the girl was offended by him. Then he put his hand on her head and her face changed. Zhang blushed a little after this. The boy asked if it was because he only praised Hua Yu. The girl replied that no, because she was not a small child. Li praised her and said that she managed not only to find out about this company, but also to find information about Wenju. He explained to the girl that she had really done a great job. He put 2 fingers up and Zhang repeated the same thing by raising her hand up. He asked the girl what this meant. Jiang Lu explained what it meant twice. She did two good things, and therefore he should praise her twice. The boy laughed and said that, of course, no questions asked. He will praise her as much as necessary. And now 3 days have passed. In front of us is the office of the group director. The news was congratulating this company and Jiang Corporation for signing the agreement. The guy who was sitting at the table was Jian Wan Ming, and he was the CEO of this company. He got very angry and asked how they could have missed this. He called the boy a scoundrel and wondered how he managed it. The guy began to dial someone on the phone, and the phone vibrated on the table. The boy picked up the phone and asked if it was Director Jian. He inquired about forest competitors emerging. The guy exclaimed that he paid him 2 million to take care of Cao and his company. And what does he see in the end? He asks to do something right now, because that guy is now at the agreement signing ceremony. The guy on the other end of the line replied that this couldn't be true. After all, he did everything right. Then his boss asked me to talk nonsense and suggested that I turn on the TV myself to see everything with my own eyes. The presenters said that this was a big part for their company, and they signed a cooperation agreement. The boy was very surprised that the parasites really didn't bother him anymore. The guy decided that the old man was at it again. And that time he babbled that he wouldn't interfere. The man exclaimed that anyway he had 3 days to solve this problem. The guy asked the director not to worry because this time he would not take money from him. Then the man replied that of course he would not take money from him and put down the phone. The boy smiled and thought while looking at his snake that their competitors seemed to have an assistant. He approached his snake and asked if he should go there himself. When the snake bit him, he replied that she was right, and while the enemy was in the shadows, he shouldn't stick his head out either. First, they need to find and detect opponents. A man came out of a large, bright building and told Director Cao that he congratulated him. He hopes that their cooperation with the Jiang family will be fruitful, but he asks not to forget about them too. The guy replied that this goes without saying and they will be in touch. After that, they said goodbye. For some reason, the man became covered in streams of sweat and began wiping his face with a handkerchief. Jiang Lu appeared in front of him. She told Mr. Cao that everything was fine. He had just recovered from a serious illness, but even so he helped her in organizing such a grandiose event to capture the attacker. The man replied that he was afraid without her and the help of her colleagues, neither he nor his company would exist. And now, they have the opportunity to cooperate with her corporation. Jiang Lu asked if he would bite today. Meanwhile, it was already night outside and the full moon was shining around, making this night not so dark. The masked man was already sitting on a high tree branch and watching through the green thicket of leaves. He thought about Realgar, which repels parasites. No wonder Miao Feng didn't want to come here on his own. He thought later that since even his attempt had already failed, then his opponent must not be so simple. Fortunately, he only needs to gather information, so there is no need to fight. The guy was already on the threshold of a building near large wooden doors. He held onto the edge of the door and became a little quiet, listening and looking ahead. He opened the door a little and looked into the thin, narrow crack of this door. He continued to peer, and suddenly someone put a hand on his shoulder and called him. Yiqing asked the boy what organization he was from. The girl asked if he was from the Dark Knight. Hidden knights are not casting shadows. The boy was very surprised and did not expect someone stranger to appear. He couldn't understand how this girl managed to get behind him. Yiqing turned to the guy again and said that if she wanted to kill him, she would have done it a long time ago. The boy decided that this girl was alone, and this was a great chance to get rid of her. Lu Li suddenly opened the door and saw the guy and asked if this was the culprit. But the guy thought that 2 against 1 is not good, and he should leave here. Hua Yu replied that she assumed it was one of the attacker's henchmen. Zhang Lu asked why he was here and whether he had been assigned to kill someone. The guy could not understand what he was saying. It seems that this is a cool mission, and now he will also have to fight for his life. The guy began to worry and, frightened, fell to his knees from some powerful blow. He collapsed to the ground and began coughing up blood. Scarlet streams of blood fell onto the hard surface of the ground, and he did not stop coughing. The guys were very surprised and began to peer at him more carefully. Hua Yu approached the guy and said that his heart rate was twice as high as normal and he was dying of heart failure. Yiqing asked the girl if it was still possible to save him. Lu Li reached out his hand towards him. He felt the pulse and told the girls that this guy was already dead. They couldn't figure out what was going on and why he died so quickly when they had almost solved it. They noticed that there was something there in front of them and began to peer into the pool of blood in front of them. Lu Li said that it was poison. There are not many craftsmen in southern Xinjiang who can create something like this. The boy picked up this parasite, which was in a pool of blood, and closed his eyes. He tried to concentrate, and suddenly opening his eyes, they glowed with a bright white light. Meanwhile, the night outside was bright and bright with the full moon and stars. Everything around was illuminated by the moon, and there was a boy on the roof of the building. He looked ahead and held in his hand some kind of sphere from which turquoise lightning emanated. The boy raised his hand up and threw this sphere down. He gave the command to break it. Lu Li, seeing this guy, exclaimed that he had finally found and concentrated all his energy in his hand. The guy realized that this person was using his spiritual power to track him by invading the sea of consciousness. The guy began to put on his hood and exclaimed that it looked like he was not so simple. No wonder Bai Lunan was dealt with so quickly. If you use such a strong practitioner to create poison of life and death, it will be absolutely wonderful. Yiqing looked at her teacher and that guy and exclaimed that this parasite died. Lu Lai replied that he had just used it to track down the puppeteers. And when the poison master noticed it, he personally destroyed it in order to protect himself. Jiang Lu said that she barely had enough time to see him. She really feels sorry for this guy. Meanwhile, the boy took out a wooden sign from his pocket. He said that they were not left empty-handed. When the girl asked if he had found another Xuanyan Alliance token, she asked if he was the killer. The boy replied that he really found it with the guy. Jiang Lu asked if this meant that these ill-wishers and Bai Lunan were allies. Hua Yu came closer to the boy and exclaimed, looking at the token, that it was glowing. Lu Li replied that this obviously confirmed his version that the killer and that poison master were in contact. Hua Yu said that she is a poison master who does not value human life at all and abuses her abilities. And this stupid killer begins to concern her with the question of what other people are in this Xuanyan alliance. Jiang Lu put her hand on her head and said that first they need to decide what to do with him. Yiqing came closer and told the girl that naturally she should report it to the police. Lu Li said that he broke into the private property with malicious intent, and besides, they had absolutely nothing to do with his death. Hua Yu began to sweat and asked, what about the reasons for everything that happened? Lu Li spread his hands to the side and replied that he suddenly felt ill. His heart stopped, which brought immediate death in. He asked the girls if it wasn't like that. They replied that it seemed to be so. And then a few more days passed. The sun was shining outside, illuminating the house with bright rays. The girl was holding a sign in her hands and asking if patient number 4 was here. She opened the door and, going inside, looked for this patient all the time and could not find it. A guy from the crowd suddenly raised his hand and exclaimed that he was here. The boy said with a smile that finally it was his turn too. The girl approached the guy and asked if he was Gu Yanzu. The guy replied that he did and asked if he looked like him. But the girl did not answer him and asked him to immediately follow him. She led him to some room and Hua Yu was already in this room. Immediately when the boy came in, she began to feel his pulse with her hand. The girl told Mr. Gu that his pulse was excellent. She explained that his qi was fine and he was healthy. Mr. Gu replied that he knew so because he takes excellent care of his health and, after all, his body is his temple. Hua Yu explained that there are usually only 2 types of people who come to Yao Pavilion not for treatment. The first type are those who are too sensitive to their health, pursuing the desire to live 100 years. And the second type are narcissists who are too confident in themselves. She meant him, of course. But the boy said that he was not a narcissist and he was not at all interested in their treatment. He looked menacingly into the girl's eyes and exclaimed that this was not what he was here for. Hua Yu sensed danger. This guy began to release a huge hissing snake from his hands. Many needles flew towards this snake. The girl couldn't let the guy attack her. Mr. Gu realized that she was using Tai Yi's magic needles. They flew towards him with lightning speed. Hua Yu was ready to repel the attack of the snake rushing towards her. He asked the girl if she was still practicing. Then the girl replied that he turned out to be a master of poisons. The boy smiled and asked if she had just realized this. He said that she was very slow to think. But the girl did not pay attention to this and asked why he was here. Mr. Gu explained that he was here, of course, to poison Tao again. If he had known that the girl was so stupid, he would not have rushed into this matter at all. The guy again released some terrible parasite from his hands. He asked if he should come back tomorrow. This parasite began to approach faster and faster towards the girl, and she struck him with her power. His parasite was half dismembered, and his body parts fell straight to the floor. The guy was very upset and got angry and asked who had just done this. Someone's hand suddenly appeared and grabbed its knife, which it used to cut this parasite. Ye Ting appeared in front of them. She easily dealt with the bug and said that no one here was stupid because they managed to fool him around their finger. Then the boy said that the two girls were at the stage of laying out the basics, and that was quite self-confident. The guy looked them in the eye and, holding his hands out in front of him, exclaimed that they clearly underestimated him. He concentrated all his energy and began to use poisonous power against the girls. He said that he had already reached the sphere of concentration of qi and possessed poison magic. Hua Yu began to use the Shuangguang formation. Everything around lit up with a bright turquoise light and the room began to glow. Hua Yu said that she would support this formation to prevent casualties outside this room. She asked Ye Qing to help deal with him. The girl replied that of course she would help and headed in his direction. She concentrated all her power in her hand and said that the sphere of qi concentration was in her hands and now she would test its strength. The girl began to beckon the boy to her and he tried to attack her. He began to approach her and said that he understood that they both wanted to die. Ye Ting did not give up and concentrated all her strength in her hand, pushing away the boy's attack. She raised her hand as high as possible and lit up with bright purple lightning. The guy was very surprised and began to scream in horror and misunderstanding how this could happen. He did not expect the girl to be so strong and rose into the air as high as possible. When the girl attacked him, she smiled and said sarcastically that that was all. The guy clenched his teeth and, covered in sweat, exclaimed that this simply couldn't be. But the girl beckoned him to her and said that she would give him another chance. The guy clenched his teeth and looked at the girl with an angry, furious gaze. Ye Qing began to use the power of the flesh-absorbing void, the indignation of the north wind. A turquoise-colored funnel rose around, and the enemy tried to use a piercing, mournful wind. He said to the girl that she was physically strong, but his spiritual energy would simply crush her. He began to scream, threatening everyone that they would never compare to him and his strength. The turquoise funnel rose higher and higher, like some kind of terrible and strong tornado. But the guy changed his face because the girls had already begun to take their own measures against this funnel. The bright turquoise light was extinguished by Ye Qing's power. She used her purple rays. The boy barely shielded himself from these rays and tried to put a block. He couldn't understand what was happening. Mr. Gu began to use the embodiment of power, and the girl continued to be enveloped in bright purple lightning. It was as if some very menacing and serious person had appeared above her head. She directed all her strength against the enemy, and he hit his back against the wall. The force was so great that bright streams of blood flowed from the boy's mouth. The guy could not understand where she got the modification of spiritual energy. Why is a foundation-laying practitioner capable of such a thing? Ye Qing replied that nothing is impossible. They are following the path of cultivating immortality. She recalled her training. How long did it take Lu Li to achieve such results from them? Jiang Lu told her teacher that she clearly remembers that in the prescribed cultivation methods, it was said that in the sphere of establishment, one again needs to focus on purifying spiritual energy. The girl then wondered why they were still doing these physical exercises. The boy sat near the tree in the lotus position and talked about what they were talking about the usual cultivation methods. And he showed them something else, deeper and more interesting, to promote their strength. Lu Li explained that the human body without practices is like this polluted clot of energy. Showing this clot of dirt, he explained that spiritual energy can help remove these impurities, thereby strengthening them. Therefore, absolutely all practitioners agree that in the process of cultivation, it is necessary to focus on spiritual energy. But in fact, the cleansing does not occur completely. Once the sphere of purification has passed, these remaining impurities cannot subsequently be purified. Therefore, no further achievements in practice can be called truly pure. The boy explained to the girls that this is why they will change their approach to this matter. And how about getting rid of absolutely all impurities and then dealing with spiritual energy? The girls were then very surprised and listened carefully to their teacher, doing exactly as he said. Lu Li continued to say that this is why they are now engaged in the perfect purification of their bodies. According to his calculations, a practitioner with a perfectly cleared base is able to defeat a practitioner who is at a level higher than himself. And in later realms of cultivation, the benefits of this approach will become even more noticeable. The hardened body is like a diamond, durable and indestructible. The basis of cultivation is formed through the condensation of qi. The girls could not understand how this was even possible in reality. Ye Qing thought about this and looked carefully ahead. The girl told the guy she had just amazed that it would be better if he thought about saving his life instead of whining. She gave him a contemptuous look and asked him to tell him what his goal was. The guy smiled sarcastically and replied that he had already said that he had come to kidnap them. Mr. Gu concentrated and began to perform the poisonous sacrifice without getting up from the floor. The girl was puzzled and did not expect such an outcome of events. Her gaze changed and she became wary. Hua Yu covered Ye Qing with her hand and exclaimed that this was the pitiful, desperate resistance of a suicide bomber. She began to use Tianyu divine needles. The girl threw a lot of needles in his direction. They flew into parasites that were in the form of scorpions and approached them. Mr. Gu began to cough, and these needles stuck not only into the parasites but also into his body. He called the girl a damned witch and asked what she had done to him. Hua Yu explained that now that his spiritual ducts are sealed, they will see what he is capable of. The guy started coughing and stuck his tongue out of his mouth. There was a green dot on the tongue. It was an item. The object shone with a light green bright light, and its rays began to spread around. Ye Qing covered Hua Yu with herself and asked the girl to be careful. This ominous force was approaching him faster and faster. Ye Qing said that the boy ran away. That green object was left lying on the floor and it crumbled in half. Hua Yu exclaimed that next time she would have to immediately tape his mouth shut. There was a parasite lying on the floor near this thing. He was alive and was moving on the floor, crawling towards the girls. The parasite approached Hua Yu and jumped onto her hand. He bit into her hand, and the girl screamed. The parasite bit her and she began to kill this terrible poisonous insect with her second hand. The girl's hand began to swell and turn blue. Violet rays emanated from it. The girl felt that this poison was very strong and she became covered in beads of sweat. Meanwhile, in front of us is a practice room. Hua Yu couldn't come to her senses and felt very bad. She began coughing and breathing heavily. The girl sat in the lotus position in this room and closed her eyes. Ye Qing brought the teacher and explained to him that this had been going on for about an hour. The girl asked the boy if everything would be okay with her. Lu Li looked at her and thought. The boy said that Hua Yu's Qi Han Medical Sutra does an excellent job of removing poisons. An hour has already passed and there is still no effect. Ye Qing brought an insect on a handkerchief and told the boy that it had bitten Hua Yu. Lu Li looked at the insect carefully and said that it was a sky beetle. He looked at the girl and exclaimed that if it was a sky beetle, then it was not surprising. Ye Qing, closing her eyes, asked the boy what this meant. Lu Li explained that he would first help Hua Yu overcome the poison and then explain. He approached the girl from behind and she glowed green. The boy began to concentrate all his energy in his hands. His hands glowed blue and he leaned them against the girl's back. Hua Yu sighed heavily and caught her breath. She hadn't opened her eyes yet. Lu Li concentrated and lowered his head down, closing his eyes and thinking. A bright blue light began to emanate not only from the boy, but also from the girl. She was shrouded in bright blue lightning and continued to be in a dream. Suddenly, the girl opened her eyes thanks to the power of her teacher.